He slid the papers across the marble table like he was returning something that had never belonged to him. Nathaniel Whitmore Vale didn't look up, didn't say her name. 10 years of marriage, and he couldn't even manage eye contact at the end of it. He just pushed the divorce papers toward her with 2 fingers, the same way he'd push a room service tray back to a hotel cart, and said, "Sign where the tabs are." Alexander made it simple. Amelia Carter Vale looked at the papers. Then she looked at her husband. He was already checking his phone. She picked up the pen. If you've ever been in a room where someone treated you like you were already gone, like you were furniture they'd already sold, then you know exactly what Amelia felt in that moment. That cold, hollow silence that lives behind your sternum, that specific kind of invisible. But here's what Nathaniel didn't know, what none of them knew. Amelia Carter Vale had been invisible on purpose. Don't go anywhere. Because the moment she signs those papers is the moment everything Nathaniel Whitmore built starts coming apart at the seams, and he won't even see it happening until it's already done. If this story already has your heart beating faster, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and let's get into part 1. The conference room on the 41st floor of Whitmore Tower smelled like leather and cold air and the particular brand of quiet that only money can buy. Floor-to-ceiling windows ran the length of the east wall, and beyond them, Manhattan glittered in the gray November afternoon like something that had never needed to earn its shine. Amelia sat with both hands folded on top of the table. She hadn't touched the papers yet. The pen Nathaniel had placed beside them was a Mont Blanc, the one she'd given him for their 5th anniversary, engraved on the barrel with both their initials. She doubted he remembered that. Alexander Pierce sat across from her, not quite meeting her eyes. He was 62 years old, had been the Whitmore family's attorney for nearly 30 years, and in all that time he had developed a specific skill, the ability to be physically present while emotionally evacuating the room. He was doing it now. Shuffling papers, adjusting his cufflinks, existing very carefully in the space between loyalty and shame. Nathaniel stood at the window with his back to both of them. He was wearing the charcoal Brioni suit he'd bought last spring. Amelia had been there when he chose it, had told him the cut was excellent, had watched him smile at his own reflection in the boutique mirror. He was 47 years old and looked like someone who had never once questioned whether he deserved to be exactly where he stood. "The asset division is straightforward," Alexander said, addressing the papers rather than Amelia. "The Manhattan apartment is listed under the Whitmore Family Trust, so that remains. The Connecticut property—" "I don't want the Connecticut property," Amelia said. Alexander paused. "The market value alone—" "I said I don't want it." Her voice was quiet. Not hard, not cold. Just final, in the way that very certain people sound final without trying. "What about the research endowment, the one under my name at Columbia?" A small silence. Nathaniel's shoulders shifted slightly at the window, but he didn't turn around. "That endowment," Alexander said carefully, "is technically a marital asset, given the source of the original funding. The source of the original funding was my surgical consulting fees from 2019 through 2021, Amelia said. $42,000, deposited in 4 separate payments. I have the records." Another silence, longer this time. "I'll need to review." "I already sent them to your paralegal this morning," Amelia said. "Heather has everything. She's very organized." Alexander put his pen down. For just a moment, something moved across his face. Not quite guilt, not quite admiration, before he smoothed it back into professional neutrality. Nathaniel still hadn't turned around. Amelia picked up the Mont Blanc. She signed the first page. The second. She worked through the document with the same calm efficiency she'd once used to chart post-operative care plans. Methodical, unhurried, thorough. When she reached the signature line on the final page, she paused for exactly 1 second. Then she signed it. Not as Amelia Vale, as Dr. Amelia Carter. She set the pen down and slid the papers back toward Alexander. "The steel box in the study," she said. "Third shelf, behind the Fitzgerald first editions. I'll be collecting it on my way out." That made Nathaniel turn around. He had a particular look he used when he felt control shifting, a kind of narrowing behind the eyes, something that might have looked like calm to anyone who didn't know him well. Amelia knew him very well. What box? He said. The one that's been there for 4 years, she said pleasantly. You've never asked about it. Amelia, the car's waiting downstairs, she said. She stood, smoothed the front of her coat, and picked up the single bag she'd brought into the room with her. Alexander, thank you for handling this efficiently. I know it wasn't easy. Alexander Pierce looked at her, and something in his expression cracked slightly, just a hairline fracture, but it was there. Amelia, I want you to know. You were always kind to me, she said. That matters. She walked out of the conference room without looking back at Nathaniel. Her footsteps were even on the marble floor. The elevator was waiting. She did not cry in the elevator. She had learned, a very long time ago, that crying in front of Whitmore Tower's security cameras was not something she wanted on record. The steel box had been on the third shelf of the study bookcase for exactly 4 years, 3 months, and 11 days. Amelia knew the date precisely because she had placed it there on the evening of a dinner party during which she had overheard Nathaniel tell his brother Elliot that she was, quote, decorative but not necessary to the actual operation. She had been standing 8 feet away in the kitchen doorway, holding a serving dish of sea bass and asparagus butter, and Elliot had laughed. She'd served the sea bass without spilling a drop. She was that controlled. But the next morning, she'd spent 4 hours compiling documents. The box was fireproof and combination locked. She lifted it from the shelf, tucked it under her arm, and walked through the apartment she had lived in for a decade. The apartment she had decorated, organized, and run with the kind of quiet competence that tends to go unremarked precisely because it works so smoothly. She stopped once, in the hallway, in front of the framed photograph that hung between the guest room doors. It was taken at a charity gala 8 years ago. She and Nathaniel were both laughing, genuinely it seemed. She could remember the moment, something a waiter had said that struck them both as funny at exactly the same time. They looked happy. They looked like the kind of couple that other couples glanced at and felt a particular wistful ache for. She stood in front of it for 4 seconds. Then she kept walking. The town car was double parked on Park Avenue. The driver, a quiet man named Henry, who'd driven her to hospital consultations and board meetings and grocery runs for 6 years, got out when he saw her coming and took the steel box from her without a word. JFK? He said. JFK, she confirmed. He didn't ask anything else. He'd worked for the Whitmores long enough to understand when questions weren't appropriate. He put the box in the trunk beside her single rolling suitcase. 1 suitcase, 3 days' worth of practical clothes, and a leather document wallet that held her medical licenses, her Columbia faculty card, and a one-way ticket to Juneau, Alaska. In the car, she finally allowed herself to feel some version of what was happening. Not grief exactly, not relief exactly, something that had no clean name, a compound sensation, like biting into something sour and sweet at the same moment and not being sure whether you liked it or not. She had been Nathaniel Whitmore Vail's wife for 10 years. She had been Dr. Amelia Carter for 38. She was interested to discover which of them would turn out to matter more. Henry merged onto the highway, and the city began receding through the tinted rear window. Amelia pulled out her phone and saw 17 missed calls. Nathaniel's sister Caroline, Nathaniel's mother, 3 numbers she didn't recognize, and 1 from a journalist at the Post whose name she vaguely knew. Word traveled fast in Manhattan when a Whitmore marriage ended. She turned the phone off. She stared at the gray sky above the highway and thought about the last real conversation she and Nathaniel had attempted being the operative word, 3 months ago, over dinner at a restaurant he'd chosen because a food critic he respected had given it 4 stars. The pasta had been excellent. The conversation had not. She told him she was thinking about returning to clinical work. Not full-time. A consulting position, a few procedures a month, enough to stay current. She'd been careful about how she said it, had calibrated it precisely because she knew how he would hear it if she wasn't careful. He'd heard it wrong anyway. You have your committees, he said. The hospital board, the endowment. That keeps you busy. Those are administrative, she said. I mean, actual surgery. You haven't operated in 4 years, Amelia. Which is exactly why I want to get back to it. He'd put his fork down and looked at her with that particular patience he used when he felt she was being irrational. The schedule I keep, the travel, the events, the obligations, you know I need you available. We've talked about this. We talked about this when we were 37, she said. I'm 45. And your point is what exactly? She'd looked at him across the restaurant table, at this man she had loved, had tried hard to continue loving, had rearranged her entire professional identity around, and she'd thought, he genuinely doesn't see it. That's the part that's strangest. He's not pretending not to see it. He actually doesn't. Never mind, she said. She picked up her fork. He picked up his. The pasta really was excellent. 3 weeks after that dinner, he'd told her he wanted a divorce. He didn't frame it as a discussion. He framed it as an announcement. He had apparently been seeing someone, a portfolio manager named Daniela, who was 31, and in Nathaniel's words, at a stage in her life where she has room for the kind of commitment I need from a partner. Amelia had sat very still in the kitchen of the Connecticut house while he said this, holding a cup of coffee that she'd stopped drinking 2 sentences in. When he finished, she nodded once. Okay, she said. He blinked. Okay. Yes, she said. Okay. He'd seemed for just a moment thrown. She suspected he'd prepared for a different response. She suspected Daniela, who was 31, had never made him feel the particular disorientation of being agreed with when he expected a fight. Well, he said. You should have Alexander draw up the papers, she said. She rinsed her coffee mug and set it in the drying rack. I'll be available whenever you're ready to sign. She walked upstairs. She did not slam a single door. 2 hours into the flight to Juneau, somewhere over Manitoba, Amelia opened the steel box. She didn't do this because she'd forgotten what was in it. She knew exactly what was in it. She did it because there was something grounding, almost ritualistic, about seeing the documents laid out in their particular order, the proof of her own history, tangible and organized, in a box she'd locked herself. Medical licenses, 4 states, all current, a copy of her original Columbia appointment letter dating to 2007. Copies of the consulting agreements, 31 in total, spanning her marriage. Corporations, private families, a foreign embassy, 2 domestic law firms. Agreements she'd entered quietly, under her maiden name, billing through a professional services LLC that Nathaniel had never asked about and she had never mentioned. Copies of correspondence, 15 years of carefully maintained professional relationships with people who knew her as Dr. Amelia Carter, trauma specialist, and had no particular idea she was also a Whitmore wife. And in a sealed inner envelope, paperclipped to a 4-page summary document, the particulars of the Whitmore accounts she'd helped to stabilize, the partnerships she'd quietly brokered, the phone calls she'd made using her own credibility to vouch for Nathaniel's business decisions when his own word wasn't sufficient. She held the sealed envelope for a moment, then she put it back in the box and locked it. She would not use those documents the way a vindictive woman might use them. She wasn't going to burn anything down. That had never been the plan. The plan was simply to leave, to walk out of Nathaniel Whitmore's orbit and see what happened to it once she stopped managing its gravity. She suspected it wouldn't take long. Dr. Grace Alden met her at the Juneau airport with a thermos of black coffee and the expression of someone who had been simultaneously expecting and dreading this phone call for about 6 years. Grace was 51, built like someone who had spent decades hauling rescue equipment through impossible weather. With close-cropped gray hair, she'd stopped apologizing for around 2018, and the kind of directness that people either loved immediately or never adjusted to. She and Amelia had been in the same surgical residency cohort at Johns Hopkins. They'd been friends in the specific, intense way that you become friends with someone when you've both gone without sleep for 36 hours and made life or death decisions before breakfast. They'd stayed in contact throughout Amelia's marriage. Carefully. Occasionally. The way you maintain a relationship with a version of yourself that you've set aside for later. You look terrible, Grace said, handing her the coffee. Thank you, Amelia said. How's the shoulder? Fine. You said that last time too, and then I watched you favor it for 3 days. The shoulder is manageable, Amelia said. Can we? The apartment above the center is ready. It's small. The heat's been unreliable, but I've had someone look at it twice this week, so hopefully… Grace. Yeah. Thank you for answering the phone. Grace looked at her for a moment, then she picked up the rolling suitcase and started walking. Coffee first, she said. Then I'll show you around. We've got a trauma bay that'll make your fingers twitch. Amelia followed her through the terminal. Outside, the cold hit immediately. Not the wet, dense cold of Manhattan winters, but something drier and more absolute, the kind of cold that clarifies everything it touches. Amelia took a breath and felt it reach all the way to the bottom of her lungs. She had not taken a full breath since November. She hadn't known that until just now. The Northern Emergency Response Center sat on the eastern edge of Juneau's developed area, a cluster of linked buildings that managed to look purposeful rather than merely functional. Grace had built it over 7 years, starting from a federal grant and several private donations, and it showed the kind of institution that had been assembled piece by piece by someone who knew exactly what she was building and refused to cut corners even when corners were being cut everywhere else. Amelia's tour took 2 hours. She spent 45 minutes of it in the trauma bay, not speaking, just looking. The equipment was excellent, not Manhattan excellent. The resource gap was real and noticeable. But the team who maintained it had clearly compensated with rigorous protocol and creative problem solving, which in Amelia's experience produced better surgeons than unlimited budget ever could. ICU capacity? She asked. 8 beds, Grace said. 12 in a push. We've pushed to 14 twice. Surgical team? Rotating. 2 full-time, 4 consultants on call. We use telemedicine for overflow consult with Seattle and Vancouver. Amelia nodded slowly. What do you need most? Right now? Grace paused. Someone who's operated on blunt trauma in sub-zero conditions without flinching and can also train my residents without terrifying them. I terrify residents, Amelia said. You challenge residents, Grace corrected. There's a difference, and most of mine are ready for it. Amelia looked at the trauma bay one more time. At the clean lines of it, the order, the honest utility of a space designed purely for what mattered. I'll want 2 weeks to observe before I touch anything, she said. Agreed, Grace said. And I'm not a full hire. I'm a consultant until we both decide otherwise. Also agreed. And I need… Amelia stopped. What? She exhaled. I need it to be quiet. About who I am. I don't want to be Nathaniel Whitmore's ex-wife here. I don't want that conversation. Grace looked at her steadily. You're Dr. Amelia Carter, she said. That's all anyone here needs to know. It was, Amelia thought, the most straightforward sentence anyone had said to her in approximately 10 years. She met Dr. Luca Bennett on her 3rd day. She hadn't been avoiding him specifically. She'd been avoiding the common areas in general. She needed time to acclimate, to learn the rhythms of the center before she inserted herself into them. Grace had allowed this without comment, which was one of the specific reasons Amelia had always trusted her. But the dining room, on day 3, at 6:47 in the morning, was supposed to be empty. Amelia had confirmed this empirically over 2 days. The early shift didn't come in until 7. The night team was logging out, and the 30-minute gap between them was quiet. It was not quiet. Someone had gotten there before her. I was sitting at the far table with a mug of coffee and a paper chart, an actual paper chart, which struck her immediately as either archaic or deliberate. And when she came in, he glanced up once, assessed her in the efficient way that emergency physicians assess unfamiliar people, possible patient, possible colleague, possible complication, and then looked back at his chart. Not unfriendly, just focused. She poured her coffee. She sat 3 tables away. She opened her laptop. 5 minutes passed. You're the new consultant, he said. She looked up. I am. Carter? Yes. He nodded, made a notation on his chart. Grace said you were good. Grace is biased. We've known each other 25 years. He looked up at that. He had an interesting face, not conventionally handsome, but the kind of face that would be difficult to forget. A scar ran from the outer corner of his left eye toward his jaw, faded but permanent. His hands, she noticed, were a surgeon's hands, precise, slightly calloused, carrying the particular history of people who worked with them. Luca Bennett, he said. I know, she said. Grace mentioned you. Did she? She said you were the best trauma response physician she'd ever worked with, and also that you were difficult before 9 a.m. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one. She's not wrong about either, he said. I'm not easy either, Amelia said. Before 9. Good, he said. Easy people make me nervous. He went back to his chart. She went back to her laptop. It wasn't a friendship. It wasn't even a conversation, exactly. But something had shifted in the room's texture. Some particular kind of weight had lifted slightly, the specific weight of being unknown and unestablished in a new place. And when she walked to the window to refill her coffee, The cold landscape beyond the glass looked, for the first time, less like exile and more like somewhere she might have actually chosen to be. Back in Manhattan, on the same morning, Nathaniel Whitmore Vail walked into his private office on the 43rd floor and found 3 voicemails from partners he trusted and one from his account manager at the primary investment bank that held the Whitmore Group's operational lines of credit. He listened to the first 3 with growing irritation. He listened to the 4th one standing very still. Then he sat down. Reginald Marsh, Reggie, who had been the Whitmore Group's lead financial contact for 11 years, had left a message that was brief and professionally worded and communicated, beneath its professional wording, a fairly specific kind of alarm. 3 institutional partners had requested formal reviews of their agreements with Whitmore Group. This was not unprecedented. It was the specific clustering of it, 3 in 1 week, that was unusual. Nathaniel called Reggie back. "Nathaniel," Reggie's voice was carefully even. "Thanks for returning quickly. What's happening? I want to be transparent with you. The review requests themselves aren't necessarily indicative of—" "Reggie, what's happening?" A small pause. "Do you know a man named Walter Chin?" "Chin Capital. Yes. We've been in preliminary discussions for—" He's paused those discussions. His office reached out this morning. He didn't give a specific reason, but his assistant mentioned— Another pause, this one more careful. She mentioned that Dr. Carter had been very helpful to them in the past. A silence. "He means my wife," Nathaniel said. Yes, I wasn't aware of the— What exactly did Dr. Carter do for Walter Chin?" "I don't have the full picture," Reggie said, which was the most alarming thing he could have said, because Reggie always had the full picture. "But from what I understand, there were some clinical consulting arrangements that also involved— I'm not entirely sure how to characterize this— some introductions and informal guarantees related to the initial Whitmore-Chin discussions in 2010. Nathaniel sat very still. "My wife brokered the initial Whitmore-Chin relationship," he said. "It appears that yes, in some capacity. And Chin is pausing because she's gone." Reggie said nothing for a moment. "I think," he said finally carefully, "that it might be helpful to understand what other relationships may have had a similar structure." Nathaniel put the phone down without hanging it up. He looked at the window. Manhattan glittered below in its usual way, indifferent to being observed. He thought about a steel box on a study bookshelf. He thought about a signature written in a name he hadn't heard her use in years. He thought about 3 words he'd said to his brother at a dinner party, decorative but not necessary. He picked the phone back up. "Reggie," he said, "send me everything you have on the Chin relationship, everything, dating back to the beginning." "Of course," Reggie said. "And Nathaniel, what?" "The other 2 review requests. One of them is from the Callaway Medical Foundation." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. The Callaway Foundation had been one of the Whitmore Group's anchoring institutional partners for 8 years, a relationship he had been privately proud of, privately considered a signature achievement. "I'll need to see those files too," he said. "Already pulling them," Reggie said. After he hung up, Nathaniel sat in his expensive chair in his expensive office and looked at his phone for a long time, scrolling to a contact he hadn't called in 9 months. Amelia. He started to press the number. He stopped. He put the phone down. He would figure this out himself. He always had. He was wrong about that, but it would take him several more weeks to understand how wrong. The snowstorm hit Juneau on Amelia's 9th day at the center. It came from the north with the particular violence of an Arctic system, not gradual, not buildable toward, just suddenly, completely present, the way true emergencies always are. By 8 a.m., it had shut the highway, and by 9:30 the center was on full emergency protocol. Amelia had been observing, as agreed. She'd sat in on 3 procedures, attended 2 briefings, spent 4 hours reviewing case files in the back office. She had not touched a patient. She had not introduced herself to the nursing teams as anything beyond a colleague of Dr. Alden's. At 10:17 a.m., the radio call came in. Passenger transport vehicle, an overland shuttle running between communities, had gone off the embankment on the highway north of town. 17 people on board. The storm had reached the site. Rescue teams were 40 minutes out. Grace appeared in the doorway of the back office. She looked at Amelia. She didn't say anything. Amelia closed her case file. "What do you need?" she said. Luca went out with the first response team. Amelia was assigned to Trauma Bay Preparation, which was, she understood, the appropriate deployment for someone on day 9 who hadn't been cleared for field work. She prepared the bay. She reviewed the incoming patient information as it came over the radio. She listened to Luca's voice on the frequency, calm, specific, unhurried, even when the information he was relaying was not calm-making. And she understood, with the clarity of long experience, that he was exactly as good as Grace had said he was. The first patient arrived at 11:02. By 11:45, the center had received 9 of the 17 passengers. Most were trauma level 2 or 3, manageable, serious, requiring attention, but not immediately life-threatening. 2 were critical. At 12:19, Luca came through the bay doors carrying a 17-year-old girl named Sophie. Sophie had been in the rear of the vehicle when it went over. Her vitals were unstable. She had blunt force injuries to the chest and abdomen. She was losing pressure, and the specific pattern of it, the particular way her blood pressure was behaving, the breath sounds on the left side, the rigidity in her upper abdomen, hit Amelia's clinical brain with the force of absolute recognition. Splenic laceration. Possibly hepatic involvement. She needed surgery. She needed it now. Dr. Rowan, the center's primary on-call surgeon, was already in an OR with the most critical patient from the transport. The backup surgeon, Dr. Ewan, was 40 minutes away and couldn't move through the storm. Sophie's systolic dropped to 78. Amelia was already gloved. "I need the OR," she said. The charge nurse looked at her. "Dr. Carter, you haven't been cleared." "I know I haven't been cleared," Amelia said. "I need the OR." "Who do I need to speak to?" Luca was standing 3 feet away, assessing Sophie's chart. He looked up. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. The kind of 2-second assessment that emergency medicine people conduct when speed is essential and words are inefficient. He turned to the charge nurse. "Call Grace," he said. "Tell her Dr. Carter has a surgical emergency." Grace's voice came over the intercom 11 seconds later. "Carter, or 2, go." Amelia went. Sophie was on the table for 4 hours and 11 minutes. The splenic laceration was grade 4. There was hepatic involvement, less severe than Amelia had initially feared, which was the first piece of good news in a scenario that had contained very little good news. She worked in the particular state that the best surgeons reach under pressure. Not calm, exactly, but clear. The noise of the storm against the building, the even rhythm of the monitors, the focused economy of a team that had learned to work together. She hadn't operated in 4 years. Her hands didn't shake for a single second of those 4 hours and 11 minutes. At 4:58 p.m., Sophie's pressure stabilized. At 5:41, Amelia walked out of the OR. Luca was in the hallway. He'd been there, she would later learn, for the last hour. Not waiting, exactly. He had other patients, other tasks, had moved in and out of the corridor as his work required. But he was there when she came out. He handed her a cup of coffee. The same way he'd handed her nothing, actually. Just held it out, matter-of-factly, like it was obvious. She took it. "She'll make it?" he asked. "She'll make it," Amelia said. He nodded once. He started to turn away. "Bennett," she said. He looked back. "Thank you," she said. "For the—" She gestured vaguely, meaning the OR, meaning Grace, meaning the 2 seconds of eye contact that had communicated more than several conversations might have. "For that." He looked at her steadily. "You would have found another way," he said. "Maybe," she said. "But you made it faster." Something passed between them, not warmth exactly. Not yet. More like the first recognition of a shared frequency. The moment when 2 people who operate in similar wavelengths first notice that they're reading the same signal. Then he walked away down the corridor, and she stood in the hallway drinking her coffee, and outside the storm was still going, and Sophie's monitors were steady, and somewhere in Manhattan a man was sitting in a glass tower discovering that the invisible architecture of his world had a name he'd forgotten to pay attention to. Amelia finished her coffee. She walked back to the bay to check on her patient. She had 4 years to catch up on. She was, she realized, not entirely unhappy about that. Sophie was asleep by 7 p.m. Amelia knew this because she checked. Twice. The first time at 6:40 when she told herself she was verifying the post-op vitals. which was true, but not the whole truth. The second time at 7:03, when she stood in the doorway of the recovery room and watched the girl breathe. The slow, deep, medicated rhythm of someone whose body had been through catastrophic insult and was now, with some help, beginning the long process of deciding to stay. 17 years old. She'd had a backpack in the transport vehicle. Green, covered in pins and patches, the kind of bag that telegraphed a whole personality, the kind of bag that said I have opinions and stickers to prove it. Someone had brought it in with her and hung it on the hook behind the recovery room door. Amelia looked at the bag for a moment longer than was strictly clinical. Then she walked back to the staff room, sat down on the least uncomfortable of the 3 available chairs, and ate a protein bar she didn't taste. Her shoulder was talking to her again. Not screaming, she wouldn't have used the word screaming, but making its presence known with the particular persistence of old damage that had been asked to do more than the rehabilitation plan technically allowed. She'd had the surgery 2 years ago. A rotator cuff repair, necessary and successful. The recovery had been thorough by every objective measure. The shoulder disagreed. She was working through the last of the protein bar when Luca came in. He didn't knock. It was a staff room. Knocking would have been odd. He went directly to the coffee maker, poured himself a mug, stood at the counter drinking it with his back partially to her, and said, "You're favoring your left." "I'm fine," she said. "I didn't ask if you were fine." "I know," I answered preemptively. He turned around. He looked at her the way he'd looked at Sophie on the table. Direct, diagnostic, not unkind, but not soft either. The kind of attention that doesn't have room for social performance. "How long ago was the repair?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. "Carter." 2 years, she said. "Full recovery?" "Functionally, yes. But," she set the protein bar wrapper down. 4 hours of retraction puts some load on the subscapularis. It's manageable. I'll ice it tonight and it'll settle. You should have Kira look at it. I don't need... Kira is our physio, and she's excellent, and she works tonight. You should have her look at it. He said this with the particular finality of someone who is not arguing, merely informing, and who has decided that the distinction matters. Then he picked up his mug and walked to the chair across from her and sat down with the unhurried quality of a man who has learned to rest when rest is available because it will not always be. Amelia looked at him. "You're going to sit there," she said. "I have charts to review," he said, producing a folder from somewhere. "The chair at my desk has a broken wheel. This one doesn't." She said nothing. He opened his folder. They sat in silence for several minutes, which should have been uncomfortable and wasn't, which was itself a kind of information. "You were good in there," he said, without looking up from the chart. "It was a straightforward grade 4 once we got in and looked. Nothing about that case was straightforward, and you know it." She didn't answer. "The pressure management in the second hour," he said. "When her map dropped and you held the field and kept Rowan, who came in to observe, by the way, which you may not have noticed. You held the field and kept talking Ewan through the hepatic segment on the phone at the same time. That's not technique. That's not something you can teach." He turned a page in the chart. "You've done a lot of trauma." "I used to," she said. "Before." Before. He didn't ask what before meant. She noticed that, the deliberate absence of the follow-up question that most people would have asked. He was either genuinely incurious, which she doubted, or he understood that before was a door she'd indicate herself if she wanted it opened. She was used to people who pushed. She didn't know quite what to do with someone who waited. "Sophie will need a second look at the hepatic repair in 48 hours, she said. "I'll be here," he said. "If there's any sign of biliary..." "Carter." He looked up. "She's going to be fine. You did good work. Let it land." She looked at him. "Let it land," he said again, not unkindly, and went back to his chart. Amelia sat with that for a moment. The idea of letting something land, of allowing a thing you'd done to simply exist as a thing you'd done, without immediately moving to the next item, the next task, the next way in which you might be useful to someone else's situation. It was, she realized, something she hadn't done in a very long time. She wasn't sure she remembered how. Grace found her at 9:15 in the break room, trying to figure out how to phrase a text message she had no business sending. She wasn't actually going to send it. She knew this. She was composing it as an exercise in articulation, the way you sometimes need to write a thing down to understand what you're actually feeling about it. The draft read, "I'm in Alaska, Sophie's stable. I wanted you to know I still know what I'm doing." She read it back and deleted it. Grace sat down across from her and put a folder on the table. "Media's picked up the transport story," she said. Amelia looked up. "Local first," Grace said. Then a wire service picked it up because of the storm conditions and the scale of it. 17 passengers, 1 surgical intervention under emergency protocol during an active Arctic system. She paused. "They're going to want names. The journalist from the Anchorage Daily is already asking." "No," Amelia said. Grace. "No. I came here to work, not to be a story." "I know that." Grace opened the folder. "But here's the issue. The wire story is going to run with or without our cooperation. If we cooperate, we control the information. If we don't," she slid a printout across the table. "Someone on the transport had a phone out when Luca's team arrived on scene. They posted footage. It's already been viewed 60,000 times and it's been up for 3 hours. Amelia looked at the printout. It was a screen grab from a social media post, grainy storm footage, Luca's team moving through wind and snow, the damaged transport vehicle listing against the embankment. In the caption, someone had written, "Surviving this storm thanks to the people at NERC," and a surgeon who apparently hadn't lost a step. "Dr. Carter, whoever you are, thank you." "Whoever you..." She stared at it. "It's the internet," Grace said, not without sympathy. "Once they have a name, they'll..." "Find everything," Amelia said. "Yes." A silence. "How long do we have before the wire story runs?" 12 hours, maybe. They'll print tomorrow morning." Amelia put the printout down. "I'll think about it," she said. "Okay." Grace stood. Luca already declined comment, for what it's worth, said the patient's outcome was the story and the names weren't relevant. She picked up her folder. "He's been doing that for 4 years. Declining comment. He's particular about it." Amelia looked at her. "Why?" Grace hesitated a beat. Just one beat, the way people hesitate when they're deciding whether a piece of information belongs to them to share. "Ask him," she said. "When you're ready." She left. Amelia sat in the break room for a while, listening to the storm move through its final stages outside the building, the wind dropping in increments, the particular sound of it changing from insistent to exhausted. She thought about 60,000 people reading a caption with her name in it. She thought about one specific person in Manhattan who read everything. Nathaniel's assistant, a 29-year-old named Marcus, who was efficient and observant and had learned in his 18 months of employment not to editorialize, placed a printout on his desk at 7:15 the following morning. Marcus had taken to placing particularly significant items face down, so that Nathaniel could see the gesture without the information, which gave him a fractional moment to compose himself before receiving whatever the paper contained. Nathaniel had noticed this. He'd never mentioned it. He turned the printout over. It was the Wire Service article. Headline: Trauma surgeon performs emergency surgery during historic Alaska storm, saves teen's life. Below the headline, the secondary line, Dr. Amelia Carter of the Northern Emergency Response Center in Juneau, credited with life-saving intervention as rescue teams navigate record conditions. Nathaniel read the article twice. It was 312 words. He counted without meaning to. He put it down. He picked up his phone. He called Alexander. "I need you to find out," he said without preamble, "exactly what arrangements my wife made, what my ex-wife made, with Calloway, with Chin, and with anyone else in the last 10 years. I need the full picture, not your interpretation, the actual documents." "Nathaniel, some of those arrangements may have involved..." Alexander paused carefully. "There may be confidentiality considerations." "She's gone, Alexander. She took one suitcase and she's operating in Alaska. Whatever confidentiality she was maintaining was for my benefit, not hers. Find the documents." A silence. "I'll see what I can locate," Alexander said. "Also," Nathaniel said, "get me Walter Chin's direct line." "You've had his direct line for..." "I know I've had it. I want you to call him first. I want you to find out, before I call, what specifically he means when he references Dr. Carter's involvement in our relationship." He paused. "Don't make it sound like I'm asking. Make it sound like housekeeping." "Of course," Alexander said. After he hung up, Nathaniel sat with the printout in front of him and felt something he would not have been able to name exactly if asked. A compound of emotions that included, somewhere in the mix, something uncomfortably close to genuine pride, which made no sense, and which he therefore decided to classify as professional respect for a well-executed procedure and move on. He moved on. Or tried to. The call from Elliot came that afternoon. Nathaniel had 3 siblings. Elliot was the eldest, the one who'd run the Chicago office for 11 years, the one who had always occupied a position in Nathaniel's life that was somewhere between rival and mirror. They spoke, on average, twice a month, and the conversations generally contained at least one moment of strain that both men had learned to navigate with the practiced ease of people who've been navigating the same specific strain for decades. This call did not have the practiced ease. "Have you seen the Callaway letter?" Elliot said. "I'm aware of the situation," Nathaniel said. "I'm not asking if you're aware of it. I'm asking if you've seen the actual letter, because I have," and Nathaniel, a pause, loaded with something that was either concern or accusation and might have been both. "The language they're using is very specific. They're not requesting a review. They're requesting documentation of authority. They want to know who they're actually in business with. They're in business with Whitmore Group. They were introduced to Whitmore Group," Elliot said, "by Amelia. In 2000, at a medical ethics conference in Boston, where she was a keynote speaker and Jerome Callaway happened to be on the same panel. She made the introduction, she vouched for us, and she maintained the relationship for 3 years before it was formalized." Nathaniel said nothing. "Did you know that?" Elliot said. Still nothing. "Nathaniel, did you know any of that?" "I knew she attended the conference," Nathaniel said carefully, "but not the rest. I knew she was helpful at events. She was always—" He stopped. I was aware, with the sudden clarity of someone who has walked into a room and found the furniture rearranged, that the sentences he was reaching for were not adequate. That all the comfortable shorthand he'd used for a decade, "She was helpful at events, she managed things smoothly, she was good with people," was not an explanation. It was an evasion. It described the surface of a thing he had apparently never looked beneath. "The Callaway relationship is worth $240 million in active engagements," Elliot said. "I know what it's worth. And Amelia is the reason we have it. I understand what you're telling me." "Do you?" Elliot's voice shifted slightly, not louder, but denser, carrying more weight per word. "Because I have a feeling that if we start pulling on this particular thread, we're going to find that it connects to more than just Callaway. And I want you to be prepared for that." "I can handle it," Nathaniel said. "You keep saying that," Elliot said. "You've been saying it for 3 weeks. And I'll keep saying it until it stops being true." Elliot exhaled, a long, controlled breath, the kind that carries a lot of unsaid things. "I'm flying to New York on Thursday," he said. "We need to sit down with Alexander and go through everything, all of it." "Thursday works," Nathaniel said. "Good." A pause. "How are you, by the way?" It was a question Elliot rarely asked, and when he did, it was generally because he already suspected the answer and wanted confirmation. "I'm handling it," Nathaniel said. "Right," Elliot said, and hung up. Nathaniel looked at his phone, then at the wire service article still sitting on his desk, then at the window beyond which Manhattan was doing what it always did, existing indifferently, accommodating everyone who believed they mattered within its geometry. He thought about a woman who had gone to a medical ethics conference in Boston 4 years ago and apparently come home having secured the single most significant partnership in the company's last decade. He thought about the fact that he had not known this. He thought about the fact that she had not told him. And then, quietly, arriving without announcement, the way the worst recognitions tend to, he thought about the fact that she hadn't told him probably because she'd understood, with the accuracy of someone who had watched him carefully for years, that he wouldn't have received it well, that he would have minimized it, folded it into the category of "she's helpful at events," and moved on to the next thing on his desk. He thought about that for a while. He didn't enjoy it. Back in June, the storm had cleared overnight, leaving the landscape rinsed and absolute, the kind of clarity that only follows extreme weather, as if the world has been stripped down to its actual colors. Amelia stood outside the center at 6:50 a.m. with her coffee and let the cold work on her face, which she had found, over 8 days, to be an effective alternative to whatever it was she used to do in Manhattan to reset herself. She heard the door behind her and didn't turn around. "You're going to lose the ear if you stand out here long enough," Luca said. "I'm fine." You're always fine, he said. It's starting to sound like a position rather than a fact. She looked at him sideways. He was in his jacket, not the full cold weather gear he'd had on during the rescue operation, just his regular jacket, which meant he'd come out quickly rather than with intention. He was holding his own coffee and looking at the landscape with the particular attention of someone who finds topography genuinely interesting. Did Kira see your shoulder? He asked. Last night. She taped it. It's better. Good. They stood in the cold, two people who worked well together under pressure and were still in the very early stages of understanding what they were like in any other register. Grace says you declined comment, Amelia said. He didn't answer for a moment. Took a drink of his coffee. There was a situation, he said, a few years back, a rescue in the Yukon. The story got out, the way stories get out, and someone wrote a piece that was well-intentioned and accurate about the facts and completely wrong about everything that mattered. What it was like out there, what it cost. He paused. After that, I decided that what I do doesn't need a narrative. It just needs to be done. She considered that. The Wire story is running this morning. I know. With my name. I know that too. He looked at her. Is that a problem? She exhaled, watched her breath in the cold air. It might be. He waited. My name is going to connect to other information, she said, being deliberately imprecise but precise enough. There's going to be context I didn't particularly want followed me here. Manhattan context, he said. She looked at him. Grace didn't tell me anything specific, he said, but people don't usually pack one suitcase and fly to Alaska in November because things are going great. No, she said, they don't. It's your story, he said. Whatever it is. None of my business unless you want it to be. She looked back at the landscape. I was married, she said, deciding on it as she was saying it, the decision and the act simultaneous, the way it sometimes works when you've been holding something long enough that your hands simply open. For 10 years. To someone who, she paused, choosing the word precisely, diminished things. Not loudly. He was never loud about it. He just consistently made things smaller, people, contributions. He had a talent for it. Luca said nothing. He just listened, which was its own kind of response. I let him do it, she said. That's the part I'm still working on. Most people do, he said. Let it happen. It's not a character flaw. It's what happens when you respect someone who's not respecting you back. You end up borrowing their lens. She looked at him. Something in the specificity of that surprised her. You say that like you know it, she said. He looked at the landscape again. I know it, he said simply. She didn't push. He'd offered her the same courtesy 20 minutes ago, and she was not unaware of that. They stood for another minute in the cold. Then he turned to go back inside. Bennett, she said. He stopped. The compass, she said. She wasn't sure why she was raising it. She'd been thinking about it since yesterday, when Sophie's belongings had been organized, and among them, attached to the green backpack by a carabiner, was an old silver compass that had snagged her attention in a way she couldn't immediately explain. Sophie had a compass. Old one. Silver. The kind with an engraved case. He turned around slowly. What kind of engraving? He said. His voice had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. A bird, she said. On the cover. A raven, I think. He stood very still. Bennett, she said. What is it? He looked at her for a long moment, looking at her with a specific quality of attention that was different from anything he'd directed at her before. As if he were recalculating something. As if a number he'd been carrying for years had suddenly required a variable he hadn't accounted for. Where did Sophie get the compass? He said. I don't know. It was on her bag. Could I... He stopped. Started again. Could I see it? It's in her room with her belongings. We'd need to... She paused. Why? What does that compass mean to you? He opened his mouth, closed it, made the decision in the way she'd made hers a few minutes ago, the decision and the act arriving together. 19 years ago, he said, I was part of a volunteer search and rescue team out of Fairbanks. Summer program. I was 18. He paused. There was a car accident on a hiking road. A woman. She was alone. The vehicle had gone into a ravine. We got to her. She was... He looked at his hands briefly. She was in bad shape. We stabilized her and got her out. She was conscious for part of it, frightened. I stayed with her until the helicopter came. He paused again. When they loaded her, she pressed something into my hand, said she wanted me to have it, a silver compass with a raven on the cover. Amelia was very still. I kept it for a year, he said. Then I left it at the regional medical center in Fairbanks with a note, in case she ever came looking for it. I never heard anything. He looked at her. I never knew her name. Amelia's pulse was doing something she couldn't quite regulate. What year? She said. 19 years ago. Summer. August. Where on the hiking road? She said. Which section? He told her. She stood in the cold morning air on the other side of that information, and she felt the world perform the specific, vertiginous rearrangement that it performs when two pieces of a very long story turn out to belong to the same puzzle. When something you'd filed under coincidence reveals itself to be something else entirely. That was me, she said. The words came out smaller than she intended. Luca looked at her. What? The accident. The woman in the ravine. She met his eyes. That was me. I was 26. I'd been hiking alone. My car went off on the south section of the trail road. I was conscious when they found me, but She stopped. There was a young man who stayed with me, who kept talking to me until the helicopter came. I never saw his face clearly. I was not fully... She exhaled. I gave him my compass. It was my grandfather's. I don't know what I wanted. I was frightened, and I wanted someone to have it. Neither of them said anything for a moment that stretched in a way that moments rarely stretch. You left it in Fairbanks, she said. I called looking for it 6 months later. They said someone had returned it anonymously. Her voice was completely level. She was holding it level with effort. I've had it for 18 years. Sophie found it, he said. Not quite a question. Or it found its way to her somehow. She looked at him. She's from Fairbanks. I saw it in her intake paperwork. Another silence. That compass, Luca said quietly, has now brought me to the same room as the woman I pulled out of that ravine. He said it with the measured disbelief of a man who does not tend toward sentiment, but is standing in the direct path of something he cannot categorize as anything else. 19 years later. In an operating room, Amelia said. In an operating room, he agreed. They stood in the freezing morning air. The city of Juneau existed around them, indifferent and beautiful. Inside, Sophie was asleep in recovery, breathing steadily, the silver compass on its carabiner hanging from her green backpack on the hook behind the door. Amelia felt something shift in her chest, not dramatically, nothing cinematic, but genuinely. Something that had been held in a particular configuration for a very long time, releasing a fraction of its tension, the way old scar tissue sometimes will when it's finally warm enough. She was not ready to examine what that meant, but she was also, for the first time in longer than she could immediately calculate, not entirely certain that she needed to keep running from it. And then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. An unknown Manhattan number. But the area code was one she recognized. It was the exchange for the Callaway Medical Foundation's main office. She looked at it ringing in her hand. She looked at Luca. She looked back at the phone. She answered it. The voice on the other end was a woman's. Measured, professional, carrying the particular register of someone who delivers difficult information for a living and has learned to do it without apology. Dr. Carter? This is Janet Reeves, Executive Director at the Callaway Medical Foundation. I'm sorry to call at this hour. I got your number through Dr. Alden's office. Amelia turned away from Luca slightly. Not a full turn, she wasn't trying to exclude him, just the automatic body language of someone shifting into a different mode. Ms. Reeves, she said, how can I help you? I'll be direct, Janet Reeves said. We've been in contact with Whitmore Group this week regarding a standard review of our partnership documentation. In the course of that review, some questions arose about the origin of the relationship, about how the initial introduction was made and under what capacity. A pause. Dr. Carter, it's come to our attention that you were instrumental in establishing our connection with Whitmore Group in 2020. I want you to know that we're aware of that, and I want you to know that it changes our calculus significantly. Amelia was quiet for a moment. In what direction? She said. The Foundation's board met last night, Janet Reeves said. We've been watching your work for years, Dr. Carter. your Columbia publications, your consulting record, and now another pause, briefer this time. This morning's Wire story. The board would like to arrange a conversation with you at your earliest convenience, not about Whitmore, about you, about what you're building in Alaska and whether there's a way the foundation can be part of it. The cold air moved against Amelia's face. I'm not building anything yet, she said carefully. No, Janet Reeves said, but you will be. We'd like to be early. A brief professionalism in her voice, almost warmth. Think about it. My direct line is on the foundation website. We'll wait to hear from you. The call ended. Amelia stood with the phone at her side. Behind her, she could feel Luca not asking. She turned around. He was looking at the landscape, giving her the space of his averted attention. That was the Callaway Medical Foundation, she said. He looked back at her. Good news or complicated news? Both, she said, simultaneously. He nodded once, as if that were a perfectly coherent answer, because in his experience it generally was. She called Grace from the apartment that evening. Grace answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been expecting it, which meant she'd already seen the foundation's name on the center's incoming call log, and put the pieces together with the efficiency of someone who'd known Amelia for 25 years. Tell me, Grace said. Amelia told her. The full version, Callaway, the review, the board meeting, Janet Reeves, and her particular brand of courteous directness. She also told her about the compass, and Luca, and the August in Fairbanks 19 years ago, because she found that she couldn't tell one story without the other, that somehow the two pieces of information had become entangled in her chest and needed to come out together. There was a long silence when she finished. The compass, Grace said. Yes. His compass, that he left in Fairbanks. That Sophie had. Yes. Another silence. Amelia. I know. I don't have a word for that. Neither do I, Amelia said. That's part of the problem. Is it a problem? Amelia sat on the edge of the small bed in the small apartment above the center, with the northern darkness pressing against the window and the heat from the repaired radiator ticking steadily against the quiet. She thought about Luca's hands, about the way he'd looked at her when she said that was me, not dramatically, not with the theatrical astonishment that the moment might have invited, but with a deep, still quality, like a man encountering something he'd been carrying for a long time and hadn't known he was carrying until the weight of it was suddenly accounted for. I don't know what it is, she said honestly. Fair enough, Grace said. What about Callaway? I don't know that either. You're saying I don't know a lot tonight. I'm saying I don't know a lot tonight, Amelia agreed. Grace paused. The Wire story is running nationally tomorrow. I've already had 2 calls from medical journal editors. One from a conference organizer in Vancouver. And a slight shift in Grace's voice, careful now. One from a journalist at the Manhattan Post, who specifically asked whether Dr. Amelia Carter was formally associated with the Whitmore family. Amelia closed her eyes. I told him I wasn't in a position to comment on staff backgrounds, Grace said. He'll find out anyway. They always do. I know, Amelia said. So the question is whether you want to be the one controlling the story or whether you want someone else to write it. I've never liked being written, Amelia said. No, Grace said. You haven't, but you've been letting other people hold the pen for a while. A silence. Accurate and therefore uncomfortable in the specific way accurate things are. Get some sleep, Grace said. The answer will be clear in the morning. That's optimistic. I'm from Minnesota, Grace said. We're constitutionally optimistic. It's either that or we freeze to death. It was not clear in the morning. What the morning brought instead was Nathaniel. Not in person. Not yet. But close enough, follow-up. Not on Sophie, who was improving steadily and had asked 3 separate times whether she could have her backpack in bed with her, which the nursing team had eventually allowed on the grounds that psychological comfort was clinically relevant, when the center's front desk called through and told her she had a visitor. I'm not expecting anyone, she said. He says his name is Marcus Vale, the desk attendant said. He says he's... A brief pause, the particular pause of someone reading from a note. He says he represents a personal matter on behalf of Nathaniel Whitmore Vale and that he understands if you don't want to speak with him. She stood in the trauma bay with a patient chart in her hand and felt something harden in her sternum. Not fear, not anger exactly, but a tightening, a kind of preparation. Marcus. Nathaniel's assistant, the young man who placed significant papers face down. Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes, she said. She finished the chart. She washed her hands. She took the 10 minutes, not because she needed them medically, but because she needed them to decide how she was going to hold herself when she walked into that room, what version of herself she was going to bring. She brought Dr. Amelia Carter. She had decided she was done bringing anyone else. Marcus was 29 and looked at this particular moment like someone who had traveled a very long way on very short notice and was aware that his presence might not be welcome and was trying to occupy as little space as possible as a form of apology. He was sitting in the reception area with his coat still on and both hands around a paper cup of coffee the desk attendant had given him, and when Amelia came through the door, he stood up immediately. "Dr. Carter," he said, "thank you for seeing me." "You've come a long way," she said, not warmly but not unkindly. "Sit down." He sat. She sat across from him. She waited. Marcus put the coffee cup down and looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked up with the expression of someone who has decided to simply say the thing rather than approach it further. "Mr. Whitmore didn't send me," he said. She hadn't expected that. "He doesn't know I'm here," Marcus said. "I need to be clear about that. I'm here on my own. Because I think there's something you need to know, and I don't think anyone else is going to tell you." Amelia looked at him carefully. Marcus had worked for Nathaniel for 18 months. She'd interacted with him dozens of times, at events, in the office, over the phone. He was precise, loyal, and consistently competent. She had always had the impression that he saw more than he said. "Tell me," she said. Marcus exhaled. "There's a meeting happening Thursday," he said, "in New York. Nathaniel, Elliot, and Alexander Pierce. They've been pulling documents, everything related to partnerships and accounts that had your name attached. Callaway, Chin, 7 others." He paused. "The official position is that they're conducting an internal audit to clarify the structural basis of those relationships. But that's—" He stopped. "That's not what it is," Amelia said. "No." He looked at her directly. "Elliot retained a separate attorney on Monday. Not Alexander. Someone outside the family firm, a man named Derek Soriel. He specializes in—" Marcus paused again, chose his words with visible care. "He specializes in asset recovery and contractual dispute." A silence. "They're going to argue," Amelia said slowly, "that my consulting activities during the marriage constituted a marital asset." "They're going to argue," Marcus said, "that any financial benefit you derived from professional activities conducted under Dr. Amelia Carter during the marriage should be subject to retroactive inclusion in the settlement." He said it fast, like a man who'd been practicing the sentence and wanted to get through it cleanly. "The endowment, the consulting income, the LLC." Amelia sat very still. "The settlement was signed," she said. "Sorrell's position, from what I've overheard, is that you withheld material financial information during the settlement process, that the consulting income constituted a hidden asset." Marcus's jaw was tight. "It's not a guaranteed case, but it's a case, and Elliot is the one pushing it, not Nathaniel, not initially. Nathaniel has been—" He hesitated. "He's been more conflicted, but Elliot is driving it, and Nathaniel isn't stopping him." Amelia looked at the wall behind Marcus's shoulder, at the institutional beige of it, at the small framed photograph someone had put there. A landscape, mountains, water, the generic comfort of a place that wasn't anyone's specific home. "The consulting income," she said, quietly and precisely, "was reported to the IRS. Every dollar, filed under my name, my LLC, my tax identification number. Nathaniel had full access to our joint accountant, and I never prevented him from reviewing anything." She paused. "The accounts were not hidden. They were not asked about." "I know," Marcus said. "He never asked," she said. The words came out with a particular flatness that was not calm, but was the texture of something just past the edge of calm. "In 10 years. He never asked what I did with the income I generated. He didn't ask because it didn't occur to him that I was generating income worth asking about." She paused. "He thought I was decorative." Marcus flinched slightly. He knew the word. He had been in the hallway that night. He remembered the dinner party and where he'd been standing and what he'd heard and how he'd felt about it and how he'd carried it without saying anything, because saying something was not his place, and also because he suspected Amelia already knew, and that knowledge was its own particular wound he didn't need to reopen. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have. I know this isn't my business. I know I've crossed a line coming here. If you want me to leave—" "Why are you here?" she said. Not aggressively, genuinely, he looked at her. "Because you were always decent to me," he said. "And because what they're planning isn't fair. And because I've spent 18 months working for someone who has a lot of qualities I genuinely respect and is currently making a decision I think he'll spend a long time regretting, and I can't make him see that, so I came here instead." He exhaled. "And because I thought you should be able to prepare." She looked at him for a long moment. "Go home, Marcus," she said. Not cold. Something else. Something that had the texture of a decision being made. "Go back to New York. Don't tell Nathaniel you were here." "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm going to make a phone call," she said. She stood. He stood. They were in a reception area in Juneau, Alaska, and outside the window the morning was the particular blue-white of post-storm clarity, and somewhere in Manhattan a meeting was being organized that would, if she let it, turn the last 10 years of her life into a legal argument about what she was allowed to claim as her own. She was not going to let it. She called Alexander Pierce from the stairwell outside the reception area because the stairwell was empty and had decent acoustics, and she needed to hear her own voice clearly while she said what she was about to say. Alexander answered on the third ring. "Amelia." He sounded like he'd been expecting her call the way a person expects a diagnosis they've already half received. "Derek Sorrell," she said. A silence. Longer than it needed to be. "Amelia." "Elliot retained Derek Sorrell," she said. "You know about this." "My position in this situation is—" "Alexander, you have been the Whitmore family's attorney for 30 years. I understand your position. I'm not asking you to violate anything. I'm asking you to tell me one thing. Did Nathaniel authorize this?" Another silence. This one had a different quality, the quality of a man doing something very careful with words that are technically true. "Nathaniel has not explicitly authorized," Alexander began. "Has he stopped it?" The silence that followed was not technically an answer. It was, however, completely clear. Amelia leaned her back against the stairwell wall. She felt the cold of the concrete through her scrubbed top. She focused on the physical sensation of it, the specific, undeniable reality of cold concrete, because she needed something external to hold on to while the inside of her chest did what it was doing. "I protected him," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She was faintly surprised by that. "For 10 years, I protected Whitmore Group's relationships, his reputation, his accounts. I did it without being asked because I understood the stakes. I did it without taking credit because that wasn't the arrangement." She paused. "And now he's allowing his brother to use that work as ammunition." "Amelia." Alexander's voice had dropped to something lower and more private, the voice he used when he was speaking as a person rather than an attorney. "I want you to know that I have advised strongly against this course of action. I've told Elliot and I've told Nathaniel that the evidentiary basis is weak, and the optics are—" "The optics," she said. "I know how that sounds." "You advise them against it because the case is weak," she said, "not because it's wrong." A pause. Honest, at least. "Both," he said quietly. "Both reasons." She stood in the stairwell. "Open the sealed envelope, Alexander." "I'm sorry?" "In my steel box. The sealed inner envelope. You know what I'm describing. I left documentation with your paralegal 2 days after the settlement. A sealed envelope marked for your eyes only, to be opened in the event of a legal challenge to the settlement terms. Heather has it." A very long silence. "You prepared for this," he said. "I prepared for everything," she said. "I always did." She heard him exhale, the sound of a man setting down something heavy he hadn't realized he was carrying. "What's in it?" he said. "Everything," she said. "Every account I touched, every relationship I maintained, every agreement I facilitated, with dates, communications, and the explicit financial value of each to Whitmore Group, itemized." She paused. "The total is not a number Elliot will want in front of a judge. It is significantly larger than my consulting income. It represents 10 years of work that was never compensated and never credited, and was, in fact, described to a dinner table as decorative." Silence. Tell Elliot, she said, that the envelope exists. You don't have to show him the contents yet. Just tell him it exists and tell him what I've told you about what's in it. And then tell him that if Sorrel files a single document, that envelope goes to every institutional partner, every journalist who's called Grace's office this week, and Janet Reeves at the Callaway Foundation, who has already expressed significant personal interest in my work and would find the context. She chose the word carefully, illuminating. Alexander said nothing for several seconds. Amelia, he said finally, I owe you an apology for not, I should have, at various points over the years. Yes, she said, you should have, but that's not what I need from you right now. She pushed off the wall. I need you to make the call, today, before Thursday. I'll make it today, he said. She ended the call. She stood in the stairwell for a moment. Her hands were steady. She checked them specifically, turned them over and looked at them, the way she checked them before a procedure, looking for tremor, for any sign that the body was registering what the mind was insisting it could handle. They were steady. She went back to work. By 3 in the afternoon, 2 things had happened. The first was that Sophie had been moved out of recovery and into a standard room and had asked for her backpack and had been given it and had immediately unclipped the silver compass from the carabiner and held it in her palm and looked at it for a long time with the expression of someone examining something they've always had but never quite seen. When Amelia came in for the afternoon check, Sophie held it up. Do you know anything about compasses? Sophie asked. She was 17 and pale and had the sharp, watchful eyes of someone who had been frightened and had processed most of the fright and was now running on the particular alertness that follows trauma. A little, Amelia said. This one's old. Like actually old. Someone gave it to me, a woman in Fairbanks. She said it had been returned to a hospital there and she wanted someone young to have it because she didn't have children. And she said, Sophie looked at the compass. She said it had been held by someone who saved her life and it deserved to keep traveling. Amelia sat down in the visitor's chair very slowly. When? She said. Like 2 years ago? I was visiting my grandmother and this woman stopped me on the street. She had silver hair. She said she recognized my jacket. I had this patches jacket, same one. She said she recognized it from a picture she'd seen in a local paper, something about a youth conservation project. Sophie looked at Amelia. It sounds weird. It was kind of weird. But she was, I don't know, she felt real. Not like a stranger, like someone who was supposed to give me something. Amelia looked at the compass in Sophie's hand. The woman in Fairbanks with silver hair. The hospital that had logged an anonymous return 18 years ago. The compass that had been left and retrieved and given again and now hung on a 17-year-old's backpack in a trauma bay in Juneau. She didn't say anything for a moment. Keep it, she said finally. It's yours now. You sure? I'm sure, Amelia said. It's been finding its way to the right person for a long time. I think it's landed. Sophie looked at her with the perceptive seriousness of a teenager who understands more than adults tend to credit. You know something about this compass, she said. Don't you? I know a little, Amelia said. Enough to know it's in good hands. Sophie looked at it one more time, clipped it back onto the carabiner. Okay, she said, with the particular decisiveness of someone who has decided to accept a mystery without requiring it to fully explain itself. The second thing that happened at 3 in the afternoon was that Nathaniel called. Not Marcus, not Alexander. Nathaniel himself. She was in the corridor outside Sophie's room when the phone rang, and she looked at it, and his name was on the screen. The contact she hadn't deleted, hadn't modified, hadn't moved, because deleting it would have been a gesture, and she was past gestures. She answered it. Nathaniel, she said, Amelia. His voice was not what she expected. She had expected controlled. Instead, he sounded like a man who had been up for most of the previous night and had used the time to arrive somewhere he hadn't anticipated arriving. I saw the article. Everyone saw the article, she said. You saved a kid's life. My team did, she said. I was part of it. A pause. That's not how the article read. Articles rarely read accurately. Another pause. Longer. She heard him exhale. A specific kind of exhale, the kind that carries the weight of something a person has been holding in a particular position for too long. I know about Marcus, he said. She said nothing. He told me this morning, when he got back. Nathaniel's voice was measured, but something beneath the measure was under strain. He told me he'd gone to Alaska. He told me why. And? And I'm not filing anything, Nathaniel said. I want you to know that. Elliot moved too fast, and I should have stopped him sooner, and I... He stopped, started again. The Sorrel situation is over. I called it off this morning. She stood in the corridor. A nurse passed. The building breathed around her, the steady, purposeful sound of a place where work was always being done. What do you want, Nathaniel? She said. A silence that had more inside it than she could fully parse. I want to understand, he said. The Callaway Foundation, Chin, the others. I've been going through the documents all week, Amelia, and I keep finding your name in the margins of things, behind things, and I don't... His voice changed slightly. I don't understand how I didn't see it. You didn't look, she said. I know. You decided what I was, and you stopped looking. I know. The words came out stripped of defense. Just the words. Just the acknowledgement of them. I know that. I'm not calling to argue about it. I know what I did. She leaned against the corridor wall. Her shoulder had tightened again. She made herself breathe. Then why are you calling? She said. Because Elliot is going to keep pushing, Nathaniel said. Even without Sorrel. He's going to keep trying to find an angle. He has his own investors to answer to, and the Callaway situation has spooked people, and he's... A pause. He's going to try to connect your work to the Whitmore accounts in a way that makes it look like an asset we're owed. He can try, she said. Tell him to open the envelope. A beat. Alexander told me. Then you know he has nothing, she said. Because what's in that envelope doesn't make me a Whitmore asset. It makes me someone Whitmore Group couldn't have functioned without. Those are very different legal positions. A silence. I know, Nathaniel said. Quietly. Precisely. With the specific weight of a man who has finally, at significant cost, understood something he should have understood years ago. Then tell Elliot, she said. Tell him clearly. Because I will not spend the next 2 years in a courtroom defending work I did for free out of loyalty to a man who didn't ask whether it was worth anything. She exhaled once, controlled. I have things to build, Nathaniel. Important things. I will not be distracted by this. She heard him swallow. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. Amelia, he started. Don't, she said. Not harshly, but with a completeness that left no room. Not today. Maybe not ever, but definitely not today. She ended the call. She put the phone in her pocket and stood in the corridor with both palms flat against the cool wall behind her, pressing the solidity of it, grounding herself in the specific sensory reality of her body. In this place, this building, this choice. Then Luca came around the corner at the end of the corridor. He stopped when he saw her face. He didn't say anything. He just stopped. She looked at him, the scar at the corner of his eye, the hands that had pulled her out of a ravine 19 years ago and hadn't known it and hadn't asked for anything in return. The Whitmore Group's board, she said, is calling a formal celebration next month. Nathaniel just told me. A public event. Investors, partners, press. He wants to present the company as stable despite the recent, she paused, turbulence. And, Luca said, and Alexander Pierce called me 6 minutes ago to tell me that he's been asked to present at that event, to speak about the partnership history of Whitmore Group. She met Luca's eyes. He's going to bring the envelope. Luca's expression shifted, just slightly. Did he tell Nathaniel that? Not yet, she said. Does Nathaniel know what's in it? He knows the outline, she said. He doesn't know the full detail. Nobody does except Alexander and me. Luca was quiet for a moment, thinking with the focused economy of someone who processes information at speed. If Pierce presents at that event, publicly, then everything I did for that company becomes part of the public record, she said, in a room full of investors and journalists, at an event Nathaniel has framed as his moment of stability. She breathed. It's not a weapon. I don't want to use it as a weapon. But if Elliot doesn't stand down, if they push this into something public and adversarial, then Alexander has indicated he will not misrepresent the history of those partnerships, even on a stage Nathaniel has built. Luca looked at her for a long moment. What do you want to happen? He asked. It was, she thought, exactly the right question. Not what did you do, not what will they do, not what should happen according to some external standard of fairness or strategy. What do you want? She thought about it honestly. About Manhattan and 10 years in a dinner party and sea bass and asparagus butter. About a steel box on a shelf and a signature in the name she'd been born with. About a compass traveling from hand to hand through 19 years until it ended up in a room where the right people finally knew what it meant. I want to build something, she said, something that matters. And I want to do it without spending the next year looking over my shoulder at what's coming from behind me. Then you need it settled, he said. Yes. Before the event. Yes. He nodded once. The decisive, economical nod of a man who has assessed a situation and arrived at the logical next step. Then let's make sure it gets settled, he said, as if it were that simple, as if the sheer practical clarity of wanting a thing and working toward it were sufficient, which in his experience it often was. She looked at him. She thought about a teenager in Alaska who'd been given a compass by a silver-haired woman on a street in Fairbanks who said it deserved to keep traveling. She thought about the specific thing Luca had said in the cold that morning, that the compass had now brought him to the same room as the woman he'd pulled from the ravine. She thought about what it meant to be in the same room as the right person at the right time, and whether she was capable of recognizing it without letting the habit of caution override the fact of it. Bennett, she said. Yeah. I'm going to call Janet Reeves tonight, she said, about the foundation. Something in his face settled. Not relief exactly, but the particular quality of a man who has been waiting, without pressure, for a decision to arrive on its own terms. Good, he said. She pushed off the wall. Come on, she said. Sophie wants someone to explain how a compass actually works, and I told her you were the expert. He fell into step beside her. I'm not an expert on compasses, he said. You carried one for a year, she said. That's close enough. They walked down the corridor together, side by side, not touching, not needing to, moving in the particular synchrony of two people who have discovered that their frequencies, against all probability and across a span of 19 years, have been pointing toward the same direction all along. The call to Janet Reeves lasted 47 minutes. Amelia made it from the apartment above the center, sitting at the small table by the window with a legal pad in front of her and a pen she kept clicking without noticing. The northern darkness was complete outside, the specific blackness of an Alaskan November night that isn't just the absence of light, but seems to be a presence in itself, something that has weight and intention. Janet Reeves was, as advertised, direct. She asked precise questions and listened to the full answers before forming the next one, which was rarer than it should have been in Amelia's experience of powerful institutional people. They talked about the Northern Emergency Response Center's current capacity, its funding gaps, its geographic reach, and what a partnership with the Callaway Foundation might look like in practical terms. They talked about trauma network infrastructure. They talked about the specific challenge of delivering emergency surgical care to remote populations in extreme weather conditions. Then Janet Reeves asked, "What would you build if resources weren't the constraint?" Amelia stopped clicking the pen. She'd been asked versions of this question before, usually by people who expected a modest, hedged answer, something appropriately grateful about incremental improvements and sustainable growth. The kind of answer that didn't make funders nervous. She told Janet Reeves exactly what she would build. She talked for 11 uninterrupted minutes. A regional trauma network covering the Northern Territories and remote Alaskan communities. A training program that would produce field-capable emergency surgeons equipped for extreme environment work. A telemedicine infrastructure that was actually built for the conditions it had to operate in, rather than retrofitted from urban models. She talked about what it would cost, what it would take, and how long the full build would require. She was specific about the numbers because she'd been drafting numbers in the back of her mind for 4 days, the way surgeons draft procedure plans, methodically, obsessively, in every available mental gap. When she finished, Janet Reeves was quiet for 3 seconds. "Send me a written summary," she said. "Whatever you have, even rough. I want it in front of the board by end of next week." After she hung up, Amelia sat at the table and looked at the legal pad. She'd filled 3 pages without fully realizing she was doing it. Diagrams, numbers, names of specialists she knew, logistical notes, questions that needed answering. She looked at it for a moment. Then she started a fourth page. She didn't sleep much that night. Not because of anxiety, or not purely, but because her brain had shifted into a different register, the register that only activates when a thing you've been carrying abstractly suddenly becomes a concrete plan, and the concrete plan starts generating its own momentum, and the momentum doesn't particularly care what time it is. At 5:40 a.m., she gave up, made coffee, and was sitting at the window watching the darkness start to separate at the edges when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown New York number. She looked at it. "This is Elliot Whitmore. I think we should talk. I can be in Juneau by Thursday. Tell me where." She looked at the text for a long time. Elliot. Not Nathaniel. Not Alexander. Elliot, who had retained Derek Sorrell, who had pushed the legal angle, who had a different kind of investment in the Whitmore Group's stability than Nathaniel did. Not emotional, not complicated by a decade of shared history, just cold strategic, the Chicago office, the investor relationships, the numbers that needed to add up. She thought about what it meant that he was coming himself, not sending an attorney, not making a phone call. Coming in person, which in Amelia's experience always meant one of two things. Either someone was genuinely ready to negotiate, or they were coming to assess how much you actually had and whether they could take it from you face to face. She typed back, "Thursday at noon. I'll send the address." She put the phone down. She drank her coffee. Outside, the darkness was doing what darkness in Alaska eventually does, reluctantly, incrementally, beginning to become morning. She told Luca at 6:15, in the dining room, in what had become their accidental routine, the early morning, empty room, coffee and honesty hour, that neither of them had named or formalized because naming it would have changed it. He listened to the full thing without interrupting. When she finished, he picked up his mug, drank from it, set it back down. "Elliot's not coming to concede," he said. "I know. He's coming to figure out if the envelope is real." "I know that too." "What happens if he decides it is?" "Then he either backs down completely or he escalates publicly," she said. "And if he escalates publicly, Alexander presents at the gala and the whole thing becomes a matter of record." "Which hurts Nathaniel," Luca said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "Is that what you want?" She thought about it honestly, the way she'd been trying to think about everything honestly since coming to Alaska, without the protective softening she'd developed over 10 years of managing other people's feelings at the expense of her own accuracy. "No," she said. "Nathaniel made choices I can't forgive him for. But I don't want to damage him. I want to be free of him. Those are different things." Luca nodded. "Then Thursday has to go well." "Thursday has to go well," she agreed. He looked at the window, at the early light starting to articulate the landscape outside. "I'll be here," he said. "You don't need to—" "I know I don't need to," he said. "I'll be here." She looked at him. The specific quality of his presence, the way he occupied space without claiming it, the way he offered things without attaching conditions to them, was something she was still learning to receive without deflecting. She had spent so long in an environment where support came with strings, with expectations, with the implicit ledger of what was owed in return. That unconditional steadiness still triggered a kind of instinctive suspicion in her. She was working on that. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They drank their coffee. Outside, the morning arrived without ceremony, the way mornings in Alaska tended to. Not a grand reveal, but a slow, inexorable clarification of what had always been there. 3 days. 3 days between Elliot's text and Thursday noon, and in those 3 days, the situation in Manhattan accelerated in ways Amelia had anticipated, and one way she had not. The way she had anticipated. The Wire story went national. Her name circulated through medical circles with increasing speed. 2 more journal editors called Grace's office, and the Vancouver Trauma Conference organizer sent a formal invitation for a keynote address in March. All of this was manageable, even useful. The professional momentum she'd been building in her head was now building in the world, which was the right order of operations, the way she had not anticipated. On Tuesday morning, a profile piece ran in the Manhattan Post. Not a news item, a profile. 800 words with a photograph she hadn't provided, pulled from a Whitmore family event 3 years ago, and a headline that read, "From Whitmore wife to wilderness surgeon, the reinvention of Dr. Amelia Carter." She read it in the break room at 6 a.m. before anyone else came in. It was accurate in its facts. That was the most disorienting part. The journalist, a woman named Petra Savas, whose byline Amelia vaguely recognized, had done real reporting. The Columbia endowment, the surgical career paused for marriage, the divorce, the Alaska rescue. It was all there, framed with a particular sympathy that somehow managed to feel more invasive than hostility would have been. The phrase that stayed with her, that she kept returning to despite her better instincts, was near the end of the piece. Sources close to the Whitmore family described Dr. Carter's decade-long contribution to the family's business relationships as significant and largely unacknowledged, a characterization that Whitmore Group declined to comment on. She read that sentence 3 times. Sources close to the Whitmore family. Alexander, she thought. Not betraying Nathaniel. Alexander had been careful, but providing the quiet correction to the record that he'd apparently decided he owed her. The particular way a 62-year-old attorney with a conscience manages guilt, not through dramatic action, but through a carefully calibrated leak to a journalist he trusted. She put the phone down. She sat in the break room. Her chest was doing something complicated, not grief, not quite anger, somewhere between exposure and recognition. The strange, specific vulnerability of having your actual history told in public by someone who got most of it right. Luca came in at 6:20. He looked at her face. He looked at the phone. He didn't ask. He poured 2 coffees and set one in front of her and sat down. "It's in the post," she said. "I saw," he said. "When?" 40 minutes ago. Grace texted me." She looked at him. "And?" He picked up his mug. "And it's accurate," he said. "And it's out. And there's nothing to do about it now except decide how you carry it." "That's very," she started. "Practical," he said. "I was going to say cold." "It's not cold," he said, with the particular steadiness of a man who has learned the difference between coldness and clarity the hard way. "You did those things. The article just confirmed them. That's not a loss. That's a correction." She looked at him. "Elliot's going to have read it by now," she said. "Yes," Luca said. "He has." She understood then, the full geometry of it. The Post piece had changed Thursday's dynamic entirely. Whatever Elliot had been planning to assess when he got on the plane to Juneau, he was now arriving with different information. The envelope's existence was now almost beside the point, because what the article had done, quietly and without legal standing, was establish a public version of the history. Not legally binding, not admissible, but real in the way that public perception is real, practically, irreversibly, in the minds of every investor and partner who'd read the Post over their morning coffee. Suing her now would look like what it was. "He might not come," she said. "He'll come," Luca said. "Men like Elliot Whitmore always come. They need to look at the thing directly. They can't make peace with something they haven't faced." She looked at him with that. "You know men like Elliot Whitmore," she said. Something passed across his face, briefly, controlled. The hairline fracture that occasionally appeared in his expression when something touched a history he kept mostly interior. "I grew up around men like Elliot Whitmore," he said. "Different context, same basic architecture." She waited. He looked at the window. "My father ran construction in Vancouver," he said. "Not a small operation. He was efficient, in the specific way that efficient men are when they've decided that results justify whatever it costs to get them, including people." He paused. "I left at 17, went north, ended up in Fairbanks on that volunteer program." He glanced at her. "That August. The August. The ravine. The compass. Your father," she said slowly, "is why you understand what Elliot is doing." "My father is why I understand what Elliot is capable of when he's cornered," he said, "which is different from what he'll do when he isn't." She absorbed this. The specific thing it added to her picture of Luca Bennett, the layer beneath the controlled competence, the reason a man with his gifts had ended up in Alaska choosing emergency medicine over any of the more conventional and lucrative paths available to someone of his ability. The choice that looks like preference but is actually escape from a particular kind of gravity. She knew something about that. "I'm not going to let Elliot corner me," she said. "I know," he said. "But knowing what he is doesn't mean this is going to be easy." She picked up her coffee. "No," she said. "It's not going to be easy." Thursday came in gray and cold, the temperature dropping through the morning as a new system built somewhere north of them. By 10 a.m., a thin, precise snow had started. Not the dramatic storm of 2 weeks ago, but something quieter, more deliberate, the kind of weather that settles into corners and stays. Elliot Whitmore arrived at 11:50. He was 53, 7 years older than Nathaniel, with the particular build of a man who had once been athletic and had maintained enough of it to communicate authority without softness. He came without an attorney. She'd half expected a lawyer. Just a single aide who remained outside at the reception area while Elliot came through to the conference room Grace had made available. He looked at the room, at the utilitarian table and the functional chairs, and the window looking out at the Juneau landscape under its thin new snow. He looked at it the way certain men look at spaces that don't perform their own importance, with a faint, involuntary recalibration. Then he looked at Amelia. She was standing at the window. She had decided to be standing when he came in. Not because it was strategic. She didn't want this to be strategic. She wanted it to be direct. But because sitting felt like waiting, and she was done with the posture of waiting. "Elliot," she said. "Amelia." He sat down, which she hadn't expected, but which she recognized. Sitting first was a choice, the choice of someone demonstrating that they weren't here to perform dominance, which was itself a kind of information. She sat across from him. He looked at her for a moment. She let him. "You look good," he said. "Thank you," she said. "You look tired." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "I am tired," he said. "I've had a difficult few weeks." "I know," she said. "I've been following." A silence. Not hostile, testing. "The post piece," he said. "I didn't provide it," she said. "I know you didn't. Petra Savas doesn't work that way. She finds things independently. She's been trying to profile Nathaniel for 2 years, and this was the angle she'd been missing." He paused. "It doesn't matter how it got there. It's there." "Yes," she said. "It is." He leaned forward slightly. Elbows on the table. Not aggressive, just the posture of a man who has decided to dispense with performance. "Here's where I am," he said. "The Callaway relationship is damaged. 3 others are shaky. The Chicago investors are nervous, and when they're nervous, they make noise. And when they make noise, it costs me in ways that are concrete and specific." He looked at her directly. "I've spent 3 weeks trying to find a way to address that. The Sorrel approach was wrong," she said. "Legally weak," he said. "And wrong," he added after a beat, with the particular flatness of someone making an accurate statement they'd rather not have to make. She said nothing. "I need to know," he said, "what you're going to do. With the foundation interest. With the network you're building. Whether any of it intersects with Whitmore Group's institutional relationships in a way that creates ongoing friction." "Elliot," she said, "I'm being direct. You're asking me whether I'm planning to use my professional relationships to damage yours." He held her gaze. "Yes." She looked at him. At the tiredness in him, real tiredness, not performed, the tiredness of a man who has spent 3 weeks fighting on a front he'd opened himself and has begun to understand that the ground wasn't what he thought it was. "No," she said, "I'm not." He waited for the conditions, the but, the unless, the however. She didn't add any. His jaw shifted slightly. "Why not?" he said, genuinely asking. The specific curiosity of a man whose own calculation would have been different. "Because damaging you damages people who had nothing to do with my marriage," she said. "Staff, partners, employees, people who did their jobs and don't deserve the consequence of a personal grievance." She paused. "And because it would cost me time and energy I have no interest in spending. I have things to build. The Whitmore Group is not my project anymore." He looked at her for a long moment. "What do you need from us?" he said. The U.S. landing with its full weight, the full concession of it, the acknowledgement that this was no longer an adversarial conversation. "Nothing," she said. "I need nothing from Whitmore Group." She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "But I need to say something to you directly, Elliot, as one adult to another." He waited. "Your brother spent 10 years not seeing what was directly in front of him," she said, "because it was convenient not to see it. I allowed that because I made choices I'm responsible for. But you knew. You've always been sharper than Nathaniel about what things actually cost and who actually pays. Which means you knew what I was doing for that company, even if you didn't have the specific figures." She met his eyes. The Sorrel approach wasn't just legally weak. You knew it was unjust, and you tried it anyway because you were scared. Something tightened in Elliot's face. I understand being scared, she said. What you're managing is real. But I'm not your solution. I'm not your problem. I'm someone you tried to make into a resource after you'd already treated me like furniture, and that, she breathed, controlled and precise. That is something I need you to understand fully. Not as leverage, just as fact. A silence. Elliot looked at the table, then at the window, then back at her. You're right, he said. Flat, stripped, just the words. She waited. I'll tell Nathaniel, he said, I'll tell him the specifics, the full value. He's been looking at the summary figures, but he hasn't. He should hear the full numbers. That's between you and Nathaniel, she said. I know. I'm telling you because... He stopped, started again. Because you should know that someone in that building is going to say it plainly. She looked at him, at the specific, effortful dignity of a difficult man trying to do one right thing in a situation that had mostly been wrong. Thank you, she said, and meant it with all its complications. Elliot was gone by 1:15. His aide collected him from the reception area, and they were back in a car heading to the airport. In a silence she assumed was a different kind of silence than the one he'd arrived in. She stood in the conference room after he left and let her body process what her mind had been managing for the last 73 minutes. Her hands were shaking slightly. She hadn't noticed during the meeting, had kept them flat on the table, controlled, present. But now they were doing what they'd been waiting to do, the small tremor of adrenaline completing its circuit. She pressed both palms flat on the table, held them there, breathed. Luca came in. He took one look at her hands and crossed to the small credenza against the wall where someone had set up a coffee station and poured her a cup and set it in front of her without a word. How'd it go? He said. He's standing down, she said. He exhaled, a short, controlled breath. And I told him some things that needed saying and he heard them. She picked up the cup. Her hands were steadier now. He's going to talk to Nathaniel. Is that good or complicated? Both, she said, simultaneously. His mouth moved, the not-quite smile that she had come to recognize as something genuine, something he didn't perform. The gala, he said. Still happening, she said. Next week. In Manhattan. And Alexander, she confirmed. I need to call him today. Tell him the situation has changed, but the presentation should still happen. Differently, not as a confrontation, as a correction. She looked at Luca. The partners who've been shaky need to hear the history clearly, not as ammunition against Nathaniel, just as the actual record. That still puts you in the room, he said. I know, she said. Are you going? She looked at him. At the question underneath the question, which was not are you going to Manhattan, but are you ready to stand in that specific room in that specific building with those specific people and be, without apology, exactly who you are? Yes, she said. He nodded once. I'm coming with you, he said. She opened her mouth. Not as... He stopped, adjusted. Not to intervene, not to manage anything, just... He paused, in the way he paused when he was choosing precise words. You shouldn't have to walk into that room alone. If you want company, you don't have to want it. She looked at him. The specific intimacy of being offered something uncomplicated by someone who had learned, through their own hard years, exactly what uncomplicated cost. The particular courage of a man who had left behind his father's world and built something entirely different and was now, quietly, extending a hand. I want it, she said. He nodded. Okay. I'm going to need 2 days to prepare what I'm giving Alexander, she said, for the presentation. 2 days? He said. We have time. They did have time. 7 days until the Whitmore Gala. 7 days to prepare the documents, brief Alexander, arrange the flights, and stand in front of the mirror enough times that when she walked into Whitmore Tower, she walked in as Dr. Amelia Carter without having to remind herself that was who she was. She thought she could do it in 7 days. She had been doing impossible things in insufficient time for her entire professional life. The gala was on a Saturday. She and Luca flew into JFK on the Friday evening, arriving in Manhattan at 9:40 p.m. into the specific noise and density of the city that she had lived in for a decade and was now experiencing as something she had loved and outgrown simultaneously. Both of those things equally true, not canceling each other out. The car from the airport took them through the bridge and into the city, and she looked out the window at all of it, the lights and the scaffolding and the restaurants with their warm interiors visible from the street, and the particular way Manhattan exists at night as a controlled argument between darkness and illumination, everything lit from below. She felt Luca looking at her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. You just went somewhere." "Just looking," she said. "You loved it here," he said. Not a question. "Parts of it," she said. "Yes." "Which parts?" She thought about it honestly. "The pace," she said. "The competence. The way the city assumes you can keep up and doesn't slow down to check." She paused. "And the hospitals. Columbia's trauma bay at 3 a.m. is..." She stopped. "Is what?" "Is the most alive I ever felt," she said quietly. "Before Alaska." He looked at her. Something in his face shifted. The specific, careful shift of a man acknowledging something he wants to acknowledge correctly without overweighting it. "Before Alaska," he repeated. "Before Alaska," she said. The car moved through the city. The hotel Alexander had arranged was on the Upper East Side, walking distance from Whitmore Tower, which was either Alexander's practicality or his particular brand of dry humor. At the hotel, standing in the lobby with their bags, Luca said, "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's a long day." "I know," she said. "Are you going to sleep?" She considered lying. "Probably not much," she said. "Me neither," he said. "There's a diner 2 blocks north that's open all night. If you're awake at 3 and you need coffee, I'll be there." She looked at him. "You know a diner 2 blocks north?" "I did a fellowship at Cornell 6 years ago," he said. "The diner has excellent pie." "Bennett." "Yeah." "Thank you," she said, "for being here." He looked at her steadily, not with the soft expression that the sentence might have invited, not with anything performed, just directly, clearly, with the quality of attention she had come to associate specifically with him, the quality of someone who is actually present in the moment they're in. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "The day hasn't happened." "No," she said, "but you're here for it." He picked up his bag. "3rd floor," he said. "If you need anything." She watched him go to the elevator. She stood in the hotel lobby for a moment, in Manhattan, in November, 11 months after signing her name as Dr. Amelia Carter on a set of divorce papers in a conference room 41 floors above this city, and she felt the full weight of the distance between then and now. The specific, enormous distance of a year in which she had operated on a grade 4 splenic laceration in a snowstorm told the truth to Elliot Whitmore across a utilitarian table, given a 17-year-old girl a silver compass that had already been given away twice, and stood in an Alaskan morning learning that the person who'd pulled her out of a ravine 19 years ago had been, all along, someone she was going to need to know. She went to her room. She did not sleep much. At 3:14 a.m., she was sitting in the diner 2 blocks north, and Luca was across from her with coffee and a piece of apple pie. He was eating with the focused appreciation of a man who meant it, and they were going over the documents she would hand to Alexander in the morning, and the heat of the diner was against the cold of the November street outside the window. And somewhere uptown, Nathaniel Whitmore was sleeping or not sleeping in the apartment she had left with one suitcase, preparing to walk into a room tomorrow that was going to show him, publicly and irrevocably, the shape of something he'd had and not seen. Amelia looked at the documents. She looked at Luca. "You ready?" he said. She thought about the first morning in Juneau, the cold hitting her lungs, the full breath she hadn't known she'd been missing. "Yes," she said. She picked up her coffee. Tomorrow she was going to walk into Whitmore Tower for the last time, and she was going to walk out of it finally, completely, and entirely as herself. And whatever happened in the room between those 2 moments was going to have to be enough, because she had run out of willingness to wait for other people to decide what she was worth. She had decided. She spread the documents on the diner table, and Luca moved his pie plate to make room, and they worked through the night while Manhattan moved outside the window in its relentless, indifferent, magnificent way. And the morning came toward them whether they were ready for it or not, which was, Amelia had always believed, the only honest thing mornings ever did. The morning arrived the way difficult mornings tend to. Without ceremony, without the grace period of gradual waking, just the flat gray light of a November Saturday in Manhattan, pressing through the hotel curtains and the sounds of the city already fully in motion outside, indifferent to whatever was about to happen inside Whitmore Tower 6 blocks north. Amelia had slept 3 hours. She knew it was 3 because she'd looked at the ceiling long enough to track the time with the accuracy of someone who had done long hospital shifts and learned to measure rest in whatever increments were available. 3 hours was workable. She had operated on less. She showered, she dressed carefully, not in the way she used to dress for Whitmore events, which had involved a specific calculation of appropriate invisibility, the right degree of elegant understatement that supported Nathaniel's presence without competing with it. She dressed in the way she dressed now, a dark suit she'd bought in Juneau, well cut but not performing anything, the kind of clothing that said, "I am here to work and nothing else needs establishing." She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. She had a new line at the corner of her left eye that hadn't been there a year ago. Her hair had grown out slightly in Alaska, less controlled than it used to be. She looked, she thought, like someone who had been somewhere difficult and come back from it. Not unmarked, but not broken either. Someone who had been through a thing and was still standing on the other side of it with their eyes open. She picked up the document wallet from the desk. Alexander's copy of the full itemized record was inside, along with a written brief she'd prepared at the diner with Luca at 3 in the morning, organized with the methodical precision she'd spent 30 years building, the same precision she brought to preoperative planning, to differential diagnosis, to every situation where the stakes were high enough that clarity was not optional. She texted Luca, "Ready when you are." His response came back in 40 seconds. Lobby, 5 minutes. I was already there when she came down. He was wearing a dark jacket she hadn't seen before. Not a suit, but the jacket of someone who understood the difference between being dressed for an occasion and dressing for a performance. He had his hands in his pockets and was looking at the lobby's revolving door with the focused calm of a man who has learned to be still before difficult things. He looked at her when she came off the elevator. He didn't say she looked good, or ask if she was ready, or offer any of the scaffolding that people offer when they don't trust the other person to stand on their own. He just looked at her with that direct, steady quality and gave one small nod, the nod that meant, "I see you and I'm here, and nothing else requires saying." She crossed the lobby. They walked out into the November morning together. 6 blocks. The cold was clean and direct, the kind that makes everything precise. Edges sharper, sounds clearer, the particular quality of New York winter air that strips away everything ambient and leaves only what's actually there. They walked without hurrying. She had learned, in Alaska, that hurrying toward difficult things doesn't make them less difficult. It just means you arrive breathless. She wanted to arrive clear. At the corner of the block before Whitmore Tower, she stopped. Luca stopped with her. She looked at the building. 43 stories of glass and steel, and the particular arrogance of certain Manhattan architecture that has learned to perform confidence as a permanent condition. She had walked in and out of this building hundreds of times, had smiled at the lobby security staff, had ridden the elevator to floors where things were decided that she had quietly shaped and never been credited for, had walked through its corridors carrying contributions that dissolved into the ambient competence of the operation, unattributed, unremarked, simply part of how things worked. "You don't have to go in," Luca said. "I know," she said. "You've already won the substantive fight," he said. "Elliott's standing down. Calloway's engaged. The network proposal is real. None of that requires you to walk into this room." She looked at him. "I know," she said again. "Then why are you going in?" She thought about it, gave it the honest consideration it deserved, rather than the reflexive answer she'd prepared. "Because Alexander is going to say true things in that room," she said. "And Nathaniel is going to hear them, and the partners are going to hear them, and I want to be there when that happens. Not to watch him suffer, not for satisfaction." She paused. "Because I spent 10 years being present for things that mattered, and being invisible while I was there. I want to be visible this time. I want to be in the room as myself, just once, in that building." Luca looked at her for a moment. "Okay," he said. They went in. Well, the lobby's security guard, a man named Gerald, who had worked the morning shift for 11 years and had always greeted her by name, looked up when she came through the revolving door and said without any hesitation, "Dr. Carter, good morning." Not Mrs. Vale. Dr. Carter. She didn't know if Alexander had briefed him or if Gerald had simply read the post and made the adjustment himself, and she found she didn't need to know which it was. "Good morning, Gerald," she said. "Is Mr. Pierce up yet?" "41st floor," he said. "He said to send you right up." They went up. What? The 41st floor conference room was set up differently than it had been 11 months ago when she had signed the divorce papers in it. The long table had been expanded to its full length, and chairs lined both sides, a room configured for presentation, for an audience, for something public. Through the windows, Manhattan was fully lit in the mid-morning gray, the skyline doing its habitual performance of scale. Alexander was at the far end of the room, adjusting something on a laptop connected to the screen at the head of the table. He was in his best suit. She recognized it, the dark navy one he wore for the most significant occasions. And when he looked up and saw her, something moved through his expression that she understood as the specific, complicated relief of a man who has spent several months knowing he should have acted differently and has finally been given the chance to do something about it. "Amelia," he said. He looked at Luca. A brief, accurate assessment, the lawyer's intake. Then back at her. "You look—" "Don't," she said, but not unkindly. He nodded. "The brief," he said, "is excellent, precisely structured. I've worked it into the presentation without alteration." He paused. "Are you sure you want to be in the room? There's no obligation." "I'm sure," she said. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he said very quietly, "I owe you a more complete apology than I'm going to have time for today." "Today isn't for apologies," she said. "Today is for accuracy." He held her gaze, nodded once. "Then accuracy is what we'll have," he said. She and Luca took seats along the side wall, not at the table, not in the presenter positions, but visible, present. She set her document wallet on the chair beside her and folded her hands in her lap and made herself breathe at a normal rate. The room filled between 10 and 10:30. Partners, institutional investors, a handful of board members she recognized, 2 journalists who had apparently been credentialed for the event. She noted that, the journalists, and understood that Alexander had arranged it deliberately. The public record. The correction, made irrevocable by witness. Nathaniel came in at 10:22. He came through the door with Elliot 2 steps behind him and saw her immediately. The room wasn't large enough for any other sequence. He stopped for exactly half a second. Not dramatically. Just the small arrested motion of a man encountering something he had known intellectually was coming and discovering that the intellectual preparation was insufficient. He looked at her. She held his gaze. He looked at Luca, that same brief, accurate assessment Alexander had done. The intake of a man processing new information, and then back at her. She gave him nothing. Not coldness, not warmth, not the small social signals she had spent 10 years providing as a matter of unconscious habit. She simply looked at him as one person looks at another person, clearly, without apology, without supplementary performance. He sat down at the head of the table. Elliot sat beside him. Elliot did not look at Amelia at all, which was its own form of acknowledgement. Nathaniel spoke first, a brief welcome, the kind of opening remarks that established tone rather than content. He was good at this. He had always been good at this. The particular masculine authority of a man who had never needed to question whether he belonged in the room he was standing in. She had once admired it without reservation. She could still admire it, she discovered, the craft of it, anyway, from the distance of someone who no longer needed anything from it. Then Alexander stood up. He began with the history of Whitmore Group's major institutional partnerships, the founding relationships, the early growth, the progression of the company over 30 years. He was measured and clear, and his pacing was the practiced pacing of a man who has presented to significant rooms before and understands that information lands better when it isn't rushed. Then he reached 2019. He said, "Between 2019 and the present, Whitmore Group's most significant partnership expansions were facilitated through a series of professional introductions and relationship guarantees that I want to address directly and accurately today, because I believe the historical record of this company deserves to reflect them correctly." The room shifted. Not dramatically. A conference room of institutional investors doesn't do dramatic. But the particular quality of attention changed. People who had been half present became fully present. Nathaniel's hands, visible on the table from where Amelia sat, stilled. Alexander said Amelia's name. He said it as Dr. Amelia Carter. He said it the way it appeared in her credentials, in her publications, in the Columbia Endowment documentation, in the 31 consulting agreements, and the letters and the correspondence that the sealed envelope had contained. He said it as the title it was. And then he began. He was precise and thorough, and he did not editorialize. He did not frame it as a revelation or a condemnation. He presented it the way a thorough, honest attorney presents facts that have been suppressed by omission for too long, with the specific, careful gravity of someone who has decided that the record matters more than the discomfort of correcting it. He presented the Callaway introduction, the Chin relationship, the 7 others. He presented the dates and the documented financial value of each to the company. He presented the total. The room was very quiet when he said the total. She heard someone shift in their chair, heard a pen set down on the table, heard the particular silence of people recalculating, the internal arithmetic of institutional investors reassessing a narrative they'd believed was complete. She did not look at Nathaniel. She had decided before coming into the room that she would not watch his face during this part. It was not a performance for her. She looked at the window instead, at the Manhattan skyline, at the city she had loved in parts, at the gray November light doing what November light does, making everything honest by removing its gloss. When Alexander finished the factual summary, he paused. He said, "I want to state for the record, and for everyone in this room, that the relationships I have described were built on Dr. Carter's personal professional credibility and her sustained, unrecompensed effort over a period of 10 years. They were not incidental to this company's growth. They were structural, and they deserve to be acknowledged as such." He sat down. The room held its silence for 3 full seconds. Then Nathaniel stood up. She hadn't expected this. She had anticipated that he would let Alexander's presentation stand, would let the room absorb it, would manage the aftermath privately through the channels that powerful men use to manage things privately. She had not expected him to stand. He stood at the head of the table and he looked at his hands for a moment, and then he looked at the room. "Everything Alexander has presented," he said, "is accurate." His voice was steady. She gave him that. "I want to add to it something that isn't in the documents," he said. "Something that is personal. And I apologize in advance to those of you who are here for a business presentation, but I think it would be dishonest to let Alexander's record stand without saying this directly." He looked up, and for the first time he looked at her. "I underestimated Amelia," he said, "for a long time and systematically, and in ways that I understood as they were happening and chose not to examine because examining them would have required me to revise a picture of myself I preferred to keep intact." He paused. "That's not a complicated story. It's a common one. What's less common is standing in a room and saying it plainly to the people it matters to." He was looking at her while he said it. She held his gaze because she had decided she would not look away from true things, even when true things were uncomfortable to receive. "The work described in Alexander's presentation," Nathaniel continued, "happened because Amelia is exceptional, not because she was a Whitmore wife, because she is extraordinary at what she does. And she continued doing it in this context when she had every professional credential to be doing it elsewhere, and that—" He stopped briefly. "That is something I'm not going to be able to fully account for in remarks. But I want it said, publicly. Here." He sat down. The room was quiet again. Amelia became aware, distantly, that her hands were very still in her lap, that she was breathing at a measured pace, that Luca, 2 feet to her right, had not moved, not shifted, was simply present in the specific way he was always present, without inserting himself, without needing to. She did not cry. She had known, coming into this room, that she was not going to cry. Not because she wasn't moved. She was moved in the complicated, compound way that true things move you when they arrive too late. But because she had done her crying privately, in small increments over the past year, and what was left was not grief. What was left was something closer to completion. The specific, exhausted satisfaction of a long calculation finally arriving at its answer. The room dispersed by noon. Partners who wanted to speak with Alexander gathered around him. Others filed out in the particular post-significant event quiet of people processing something they'll need to think about before they know what they think about it. Nathaniel crossed the room toward her. Luca stood. "I'm fine," she said to Luca, quietly. He sat back down. She stood. Nathaniel stopped a few feet away. He looked, she thought, smaller than she remembered. Not physically, He was the same physical person, but smaller in the way that people become smaller when you stop needing anything from them. He was a man she had spent 10 years with, and she could see him clearly now, without the distortion of proximity. His genuine intelligence, his real capability, his specific and devastating failure of attention toward the person who had been most consistently beside him, and the fact that these things were all simultaneously true and none of them canceled the others. "You look well," he said. Then immediately, "I know you told me not to say that." "It's fine," she said. A silence. "Alaska," he said. "Alaska," she agreed. Are you—" He stopped, reformulated. "Is it what you needed?" She thought about the trauma bay, about Sophie's monitors going steady, about coffee in the dining room at 5:40 a.m., and a man with a compass scar and a pilot's patience, about cold air and full breaths and a legal pad covered in 4 pages of a future she was actually building. "Yes," she said. He nodded. He looked at the floor briefly, the gesture she recognized as the gesture he made when he was managing something he hadn't finished managing. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out an envelope. "I found this," he said, "in the Connecticut house, when we were clearing things out." He held it toward her. She took it. The envelope was old. She could tell by the paper, the way it had softened with years. She turned it over and saw her own handwriting on the front, and the date, 26 years ago, and a name, her grandmother's. A letter she had written and never mailed, found in a box of her grandmother's things that had come to her during the marriage, that had gone into a drawer in Connecticut, that had apparently survived a decade of not being touched, and an estate clearing. She looked at the envelope for a moment. "I didn't read it," he said. I thought you'd want it." She looked up at him. "Thank you," she said. "Amelia." He said her name with the specific weight of a man who has rehearsed what follows and has just decided to abandon the rehearsal. I can't." He stopped. "I don't have words that are adequate. I know that. But I want you to know that what I said in there it wasn't performance. It wasn't management." "I know," she said. "I could tell." He looked at her. "How?" "Because you looked frightened when you said it," she said. "You only look frightened when something is real." Something crossed his face. A complicated something, old and new simultaneously. The layered expression of a man recognizing himself being seen clearly by someone who had earned the vision. "I'm sorry," he said. "Just that. Plain, without architecture." She held the envelope in her hands. She thought about the woman she'd been at 26, writing a letter to a grandmother she loved, and the woman she'd been at 35 when the letter came into her possession in a box she hadn't opened, and the woman she was now standing in a conference room holding it, 46 years old, and thoroughly, finally, explicitly herself. "I know you are," she said. "I believe you." "That's not the same as forgiving me," he said. "No," she said. "It's not." He absorbed that with the steadiness of a man who had expected it and respected it and wasn't going to argue with it. "Are you happy?" he said. "In Alaska." She thought about the honest answer, the full answer. "I'm becoming something," she said. "I think I'm becoming who I would have been. And that—" she paused. "That is the closest thing to happy I know how to feel right now." He looked at Luca, who was across the room, who was looking out the window at the Manhattan skyline with the considered attention of a man giving a private conversation the private space it required. "He matters," Nathaniel said. "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. And she believed that too. He extended his hand. She looked at it for a moment. Then she took it. A handshake, firm and brief. The currency of two people who have been through something significant together and have arrived at the only kind of end that complicated histories can have. Not reconciliation, not erasure, but the honest, exhausted acknowledgement that the thing happened, that it cost what it cost, and that they are both still standing. She let go. He walked to the elevator. She watched him go. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel grief. She felt the particular quiet weight of something very long having finally concluded, the specific gravity of an ending that is actually an ending, not a hinge to something else, just a period at the end of a sentence that needed to be written before any new sentence could begin. Alexander found her before she left. He was holding his briefcase in both hands, the way people hold things when they're not sure what to do with their hands. "The foundation called this morning," he said. "Before the event. Janet Reeves." "I know," Amelia said. "She texted me." "The board approved preliminary funding," he said, "for the network proposal." She had known this was coming. She had felt it coming with the same clinical certainty she felt when a procedure was going to go well. Not certainty born from arrogance, but from the accurate reading of conditions. The preliminary funding was real. The network was real. The next chapter was real. "Thank you, Alexander," she said. "For today." "It was overdue," he said. The words came out stripped of professional coding. Just the words. Just the man. "It was," she agreed. "But it happened. That matters." She put her hand briefly on his arm, not a gesture she would have made a year ago, or not easily. The particular economy of touch that women in powerful rooms learn to perform is absence. She did it now because it was honest and because she could. She picked up her document wallet. She walked out of the conference room. In the elevator, Luca looked at her. "Okay?" he said. She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Her shoulder was aching. Her eyes felt the particular dry weight of too little sleep. Somewhere in her chest, something that had been held in a specific tension for longer than she could precisely calculate had released, and the space it left behind was not empty. It was open. Those were different things. "Yes," she said. "Okay." The elevator descended. The lobby materialized around them. Gerald was at his post and said goodbye the way people say goodbye to someone they expect to see again, and she returned it the same way because she had no reason to be unkind to the people who had always been kind to her. Outside, Manhattan received them back into its ordinary motion, the traffic and the cold and the people moving at the pace of people who have places to be and believe those places matter, which is the foundational compact of the city, the thing you buy into when you choose to live in it. She breathed the cold air, full, deep, the way she'd breathed that first morning in Juneau. "The flight's at 4, Luca said. "I know." "We have time." She looked at the street, at the city she had loved in parts and outgrown in parts, and would always carry in parts. Not as home anymore, but as one of the true places, the places that shape you by requiring something from you constantly, that teach you your own contours by refusing to accommodate them. "There's a park," she said, 4 blocks east. I used to walk there when I needed to think." "Let's go," he said. They went. The park was exactly as she remembered. The November-stripped trees, the paths still holding yesterday's thin snow, in the shadow places where the light hadn't reached. They walked without specific destination, which was itself a kind of freedom she was still learning to use without guilt. The freedom to move without purpose, to be somewhere simply because you chose to be there. She told him about the letter, the one Nathaniel had returned. She told him about her grandmother, a woman named Ruth, who had been a practical, unsentimental woman in the best possible sense of those words, who had worked as a hospital administrator for 30 years and had told Amelia at age 17 with the specific directness of a woman who had seen enough of the world to know what mattered. "You're going to be a doctor, not because you're smart. Plenty of smart people aren't doctors, because you can't not. And when you find that out about yourself, don't let anyone talk you out of it." "Did she know?" Luca asked. "About the marriage, about what you'd set aside." "She died before I met Nathaniel," Amelia said. "I've thought about that a lot. Whether she would have seen it coming, whether she would have said something that would have—" She paused. "I don't know. I think she would have liked you." He looked at her sideways. "Why?" "Because you don't need to manage things," she said. She was like that. She trusted people to manage themselves. He was quiet for a moment, turning that over. They walked through the cold park in the November silence, and she thought about Ruth, about the letter in her coat pocket, about the specific continuity of being shaped by people who are no longer present, but whose particular quality of attention you carry into rooms long after they've gone. "Luca," she said. "Yeah." "The night in the ravine," she said. "What do you remember about it?" He thought about it with the genuine consideration he gave most things, not manufacturing an answer, just looking for the accurate one. "It was late," he said. "Still light enough, the way Alaska summers are. The team got the call at about 9 p.m. We drove out in two vehicles. He paused. The car was in the ravine, not deep, but at an angle that made it difficult. You were conscious when we got there. You were... He looked at the path ahead of them. You were trying to stay calm. You were doing that thing people do when they've assessed the situation and decided panicking won't help. You were very deliberate. I was terrified, she said. I know, he said, but you were deliberate anyway. She absorbed that, the specific version of herself at 26 that she was hearing described. Deliberate anyway. She had not remembered herself that way. She had remembered being frightened, remembered the particular helplessness of the angle of the vehicle, and the sound the frame made when they were working to get her out, remembered the young man's voice keeping her talking, keeping her present, asking her questions about anything and everything to stop her from going quiet in the way that injured people go quiet when they've given up on waiting to be found. You asked me about my best memory, she said. I remember that. You said, tell me your best memory, just one. He turned to look at her. I remember, he said quietly. I told you about a surgery, she said, a pediatric case. A child I'd operated on the week before, my first solo pediatric case. Successful, she was fine. I told you about it while you were pulling me out of a car in a ravine in Alaska, and I remember thinking that was a strange thing to be talking about, but I couldn't think of anything else that felt as real, as mine. You went on for a long time, he said, about the specifics, the procedure. I didn't understand half of it. But you kept asking questions, she said. To keep you talking, he said. Yes. No, she said. You were actually curious. I could tell the difference. He was quiet for a moment. Then, yes, he said. I was actually curious. They had stopped walking. They were standing on a path in the middle of a November park in Manhattan, and she could see his breath in the cold air, and she could see the scar at the corner of his eye and the particular quality of his attention directed fully at her, and she thought about 19 years and a compass, and a silver-haired woman in Fairbanks, and a 17-year-old girl in a trauma bay, and the specific, improbable, actual truth that some threads do connect, that some distances do eventually close, not because the universe is tidy, but because certain people, under certain conditions, keep moving toward the same things. She reached into her coat pocket. She took out the letter to her grandmother. She looked at it for a moment, the old paper, her 26-year-old handwriting, her name in the return address corner, the date 26 years ago, a version of herself that had been frightened and capable and had not yet made any of the choices that would define the next 2 decades. She put it back in her pocket. Let's go home, she said. Luca looked at her. Home, he said. Alaska, she said. Home. Something in his face settled. Not relief. He had not been waiting anxiously for this. Just the quiet recognition of a thing becoming true that he had believed would become true, which is a different quality than relief. It is the quality of someone whose patience has been proven right. Okay, he said. They turned back toward the park's edge. The city rose around them in its habitual way, enormous and indifferent and beautiful. In the specific way things are beautiful when you are looking at them from a distance that is finally the right distance. 5 years. 5 years from that November morning in a Manhattan park, and the Northern International Trauma Network had reached 47 field stations across the Northern Territories and remote Alaskan communities, had trained 312 field-capable emergency surgeons, and had provided emergency intervention to communities that previously had no access to surgical care within 300 miles. Amelia stood at the podium in the main hall of the Vancouver Medical Congress and looked out at 1,400 people and felt nothing like triumph and everything like clarity, the specific, particular clarity that comes not from winning, but from having built something true and watching it stand. She spoke for 40 minutes. She spoke about the conditions that made the network necessary, the specific human cost of geographic healthcare inequity, the technical challenges of extreme environment surgery, the training methodology they had developed. She spoke about Sophie, not by name but by case, the way medicine speaks about people it has fought for, and about what a grade 4 splenic laceration in a category 3 snowstorm taught her about what emergency medicine could be if it was built for where it actually needed to go rather than where it was easiest to be. She spoke about the people who had built it with her. She said Luca's name. She said Grace's name. She said the names of the residents who were now field surgeons, and the field surgeons who were now training the next cohort. She spoke about the Callaway Foundation and what a genuine institutional partner looked like when it was actually committed to the work. She did not say Nathaniel's name. There was no need to. In the third row, she could see their daughter, 4 years old, sitting between Grace and a resident named Tomas, who had become, over the years, something between a younger brother and an irreplaceable colleague. Their daughter's name was Ruth. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's absolute refusal to sit quietly when she found something interesting, and she was currently attempting to take notes in a small notebook she'd insisted on bringing because she had, at 4, decided that conferences were important and she wanted to be ready for them. Amelia's voice did not change when she saw this. She had trained for 30 years to maintain clinical composure, and she deployed it now, deployed it not to suppress feeling but to hold it steady, to carry it without spilling it, to be moved without being stopped. After the address, in the wings backstage, Luca was waiting. He had their daughter on his hip. Ruth had the notebook open and was showing him something she had drawn. Not notes, it turned out, but a picture of the podium, which she had rendered with the creative confidence of a 4-year-old who draws what she sees and considers the result accurate. Amelia came through the curtain. Ruth looked up. "Ma?" she said. "I drew you." Amelia looked at the drawing. A figure at a rectangle, surrounded by many small shapes that were, apparently, 1,400 people. She was depicted as very tall, which was kind of her daughter given that she was 5'5". "You made me tall," Amelia said. "You were far away," Ruth said, with the particular logic of a 4-year-old who finds this entirely sufficient. Amelia looked at Luca over their daughter's head. I was looking at her with the look she knew now, the one she'd taken months to learn to receive without deflecting, the one that was not performing anything, not managing anything, just looking at her the way he looked at everything that mattered to him, directly, steadily, without requiring it to be anything other than what it was. She reached out and tucked a strand of Ruth's dark hair back from her forehead. Ruth, unconcerned, returned to improving her drawing. "How do you feel?" Luca said. She thought about it the way she thought about all honest questions, taking the time to find the accurate answer rather than the convenient one. "Finished," she said, in the good sense. He understood what she meant. He usually did, not because they were alike. They were different in most of the ways that mattered, but because they had arrived at a sufficient shared language over 5 years of building something together, of sleeping badly during emergencies and well afterward, of disagreeing loudly about protocols and agreeing quietly about most of the things that didn't have protocols. "Come on," he said. "Grace has a table. Tomas has apparently ordered everything on the menu." She laughed. "A real one, the kind that happens before you know it's coming." Ruth looked up at the sound of it and laughed too, without knowing why, which is the specific generosity of 4-year-olds. They went to find Grace. The night of the conference dinner, after Ruth was asleep in the hotel room, and Grace had taken the last flight home, and Tomas had departed for a bar with the younger residents who still had the energy for it, Amelia and Luca sat in the quiet of a hotel room with the Vancouver city lights visible through the window, and she took out the letter. She had carried it for 5 years. She had not opened it. He watched her turn it over in her hands. "The letter," he said. "My grandmother," she said. "I wrote it when I was 26. I never mailed it." "What's in it?" "I don't know," she said. "I've thought about it for 5 years and I don't know. I remember writing it, but I don't remember what I said, which I think means I said something I wasn't ready to have read." She paused. "I think I wrote about what I wanted. What I actually wanted, without the editing I usually do." He was quiet. "I think I was afraid of it," she said. "For a long time. Afraid of what 26-year-old Amelia wanted, because she wanted it so clearly, and I spent the next decade becoming someone else." She turned the envelope over one more time. She opened it. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, in her own hand from 20 years ago, smaller, neater. The handwriting of someone who was still performing the version of herself she'd been taught was appropriate. She read it quietly, and Luca did not try to read over her shoulder, just waited with the patience that was, she had come to understand, perhaps his most remarkable quality. She read it twice. Then she set it down in her lap. She wanted to operate, she said quietly. 26-year-old Amelia, that's all she wrote about. She was doing a residency and she had just completed the pediatric case, the one I told you about in the ravine, And she was writing to her grandmother to say that she finally understood what it meant to do the thing you were meant to do. That she finally understood it in her hands, not just her head. She stopped. She wrote, "I think this is what my whole life has been in the direction of. I just needed a patient who needed me to be exactly this good." The room was very quiet. "She was right," Luca said. "She was right," Amelia said. She folded the letter. She put it back in its envelope. She set it on the nightstand. She looked at the Vancouver lights through the window, at this city that was not hers, that she was moving through on her way back to the place that was. She thought about Ruth asleep in the next room with her notebook and her drawing and her dark eyes and the specific, enormous, ordinary miracle of her existence. She thought about 47 field stations and 312 surgeons and communities with access now that hadn't had it before. She thought about Grace, who had handed her coffee in an airport and said, "You look terrible," and meant come home. About a compass that had traveled through so many hands and had ended up where it belonged. About a man who had kept a stranger talking in a ravine 19 years ago because he was genuinely curious. She thought about the version of herself who had signed her name on a cold marble table and walked out with one suitcase. She would have liked all of this, Amelia said. Ruth, my grandmother. She would have liked what we built. Tell me more about her, Luca said. So she did. She talked about her grandmother for a long time. About the woman who had run a hospital administration with a combination of rigor and genuine warmth that the people who worked for her never forgot, who had told a 17-year-old Amelia that she was going to be a doctor, not because she was smart, but because she couldn't not be, who had pressed a certain kind of directness into the hands of a granddaughter who would need it later and not know she had it until the moment she did. Luca listened with his full attention, the way he always did. The city lights held steady outside. Ruth slept. And Amelia Carter, Dr. Amelia Carter, founder and director, surgeon, person, sat in the quiet of a night that was hers, in a life that was hers, and let the whole of it settle finally into the shape it had always been trying to reach, and found that the shape fit, and found that it was enough, and found, with the particular patient wonder of someone who has traveled a very long way to arrive somewhere they didn't know they were going, that it was in fact more than enough. It was everything she had written toward at 26, before she'd learned to edit. It was everything she had been in the direction of all along.